She sent one message that was never meant for him. He read every word, and instead of firing her, Adrian Kingsley did something far more dangerous. He pulled her closer. Emma Carter thought she was walking into punishment. She had no idea she was walking into the most complicated chapter of her life, a billionaire who wore his silence like armor, a secret love that cost her everything, and a choice between the man who finally said I love you and the man who had been showing her every single day without ever needing to say a word. Drop your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. The elevator doors in the Kingsley Global Holdings lobby had a particular sound, a low mechanical exhale, like the building itself was sighing at whoever walked through. Emma Carter had heard that sound every morning for 2 years, and every morning she told herself the same thing. Keep your head down. Do your job. Don't give anyone a reason to notice you. She was good at being invisible. She had spent most of her adult life perfecting it. At 30 years old, Emma's resume read like a lesson in resilience, or depending on who you asked, a slow-motion disaster. She'd grown up in a mid-sized city in Ohio with a mother who worked double shifts at a diner and a father who had the good sense to leave before Emma was old enough to miss him. She'd gotten into a decent state university on a partial scholarship and a lot of stubbornness, graduated with a finance degree that she'd been quietly proud of, and spent the next 6 years trying to turn that pride into something resembling stability. It hadn't been easy. She'd taken a junior analyst position at a firm that went bankrupt 14 months later. She'd spent 8 months unemployed, surviving on savings and humiliating conversations with her mother about whether she needed to move back home. She'd clawed her way back with a mid-level role at a consulting firm where her manager took credit for every idea she had, and when she finally couldn't take it anymore and quit, she had $3,000 in her checking account and a LinkedIn profile she didn't know how to rewrite. Kingsley Global Holdings had been, in every practical sense, a lifeline. The role was financial analyst, mid-level, buried in the corporate strategy division on the 22nd floor. It paid real money, had real benefits, and existed inside a real company, one of the most powerful private conglomerates on the East Coast, with subsidiaries in tech, real estate, logistics, and energy. She had applied expecting nothing and been shocked when they called her back. She had prepared obsessively for the interview, showed up in the only blazer she owned that still fit properly, and answered every question like her rent depended on it. Because it did. That had been 2 years ago. Since then, Emma had been exactly what she intended to be: competent, consistent, and forgettable. She met her deadlines. She corrected other people's spreadsheets without making them feel bad about it. She brought good coffee to morning meetings and said very little unless she was certain what she was about to say was worth saying. She had exactly one friend in the building, a woman named Priya who worked in HR and had an almost supernatural gift for gossip and very good instincts about which gossip actually mattered. "You look like someone who needs coffee and a reason to complain," Priya said that Tuesday morning, falling into step beside Emma near the elevator bank. She was carrying an oversized tote bag and a smoothie the color of a swamp, which she claimed was full of antioxidants and which smelled like cut grass. "I always look like that," Emma said. "Worse than usual." Emma pushed the button for 22. The Hendricks Report. "I've been reworking the projections since 6 this morning because someone decided to change the base assumptions without telling anyone, and now the numbers don't line up and the presentation is in..." She checked her phone. 4 hours. Priya made a sympathetic sound. "Which someone?" "Bradford." "Ugh, me." Priya said it the way you'd say a word that wasn't quite a curse but meant the same thing. He did that to Yolanda in March. Changed 3 columns of data the night before her presentation and then acted confused when she called him out on it. "I know, I was there." Emma exhaled. "I just need to get through today." "You always say that." "Because every day, it's true." The elevator opened on 22 and Emma stepped out. The floor was its usual morning chaos, the particular kind that looked like productivity from a distance and felt like controlled panic up close. She went to her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up the Hendricks Report. The problem with working in corporate strategy at a company like Kingsley Global Holdings was that the stakes were always absurdly high and the margin for error was approximately 0. The company operated across 14 countries, employed somewhere north of 40,000 people, and was personally overseen by a man who, according to every account Emma had ever heard, didn't believe in second chances or gracious feedback. Adrian Kingsley. She had seen him exactly twice in 2 years. The first time had been in the lobby, when she'd been new enough to still be impressed by the architecture, and he'd walked through flanked by 2 attorneys and a woman with a tablet who looked like she hadn't slept since November. He was taller than she'd expected from the photographs, broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that came from years of people moving out of the way for you. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent, and he was talking quietly into his phone, and something about the quietness of it was more commanding than if he'd been shouting. He hadn't looked at her. She doubted he'd registered her existence. The second time had been in a glass-walled conference room on the 30th floor, which Emma had passed on her way to a meeting. He'd been standing at the head of a long table, and whatever he was saying, the 7 people sitting in front of him looked like they were waiting for a verdict. Emma had kept walking. What she knew about Adrian Kingsley she knew from 3 sources. Priya, the company-wide memos he occasionally sent that were models of brevity and high expectations, and the general mythology that accumulated around powerful men whether they cultivated it or not. He was 32, which everyone found vaguely unsettling given the scope of what he ran. He'd taken over Kingsley Global Holdings 4 years ago when his father had a health crisis and stepped back from operations, and in those 4 years the company had grown by something like 40%, which was the kind of number that made financial journalists write breathless profiles. He was a single father to a daughter named Sophie, who was 6 years old. His wife had left. That part of the story was always told in shorthand, with the details smudged, the way people talked about things that were both common knowledge and nobody's business. The general consensus among the people who worked for him was some version of the same sentence: brilliant, demanding, and completely impossible to read. Emma had no strong feelings about him one way or another. He was the man at the top of the org chart. He signed the paychecks. She tried very hard not to think about the 30th floor at all, which made what happened at 2:17 on that particular Tuesday afternoon spectacularly ironic. Well, it had started as a message to Priya. Emma had been deep in the Hendricks revisions, running on her 3rd coffee, and a growing, simmering frustration with Bradford that she had no professional outlet for. The presentation had gone fine, better than fine, actually. She'd caught everything, fixed everything, stood in that room and walked the team through 3 months of market analysis without a single fumble, and then Bradford had leaned back in his chair at the end and said, "Good work, team," with that particular emphasis on team that made it clear he was filing this one under his own accomplishments. Emma had smiled. She'd said nothing. She'd gone back to her desk and opened a new message to Priya. "I need to vent," she typed. Bradford just... Her phone rang. She grabbed it without looking, wedged it between her ear and shoulder, kept typing. "Took credit for the entire presentation, which I basically rebuilt from scratch this morning after he messed up the assumptions. And I'm sitting here thinking about how this company rewards the people who take credit and buries the people who do the actual work. And honestly, I'm half convinced Adrian Kingsley himself operates the same way. Built his empire on other people's labor and just stands at the top looking important. You know what he reminds me of? A very expensive suit that learned to give speeches." She hit send. She went back to the phone call. It was someone from IT about a password reset. 3 minutes passed. Her email pinged, then her Slack. Then her phone buzzed twice in quick succession. She looked at the screen. The message, all of it, every word, including the bit about expensive suits and other people's labor, had gone to the company-wide communications thread. Not to Priya, to 4,312 employees, including Adrian Kingsley. The next 40 minutes were the worst of Emma's professional life, and given her professional history, that was a competitive field. She stared at the screen for approximately 5 seconds before her body made several decisions independently of her brain. Her face went hot. Her stomach dropped somewhere around her knees. Her hands, which had spent the morning being perfectly steady through all the spreadsheet repairs and presentation nerves, started shaking. She pulled the message back within 30 seconds, but the company-wide thread had a notification system. Everyone with push notifications enabled, which, judging by the messages now flooding her private inbox, was most of the company, had already seen it. Emma. Emma. Priya's message came through at 2:19 p.m., What did you just do? It was an accident, Emma typed. Her fingers weren't cooperating. I was sending it to you. You sent it to everyone. I know, including him. I know. There was a pause. Then his assistant just walked past my desk looking like she swallowed something. Emma put her phone face down on her desk and stared at the ceiling for a moment. She thought about the job market. She thought about her savings account. She thought about how her mother would react to a phone call that started with, "So I accidentally insulted my billionaire boss in front of the entire company." She thought very briefly about just walking out before anyone could ask her to. Then she thought about her rent. She picked up her phone, opened her email, started drafting an apology, a formal, professional, completely mortifying apology, to the company-wide thread. She got 4 sentences in before her office extension rang. She already knew, before she picked it up, who it would be. "Miss Carter?" The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Helen Park, who was Adrian Kingsley's executive assistant and who Emma had spoken to exactly once before when she'd needed a conference room booked and gone through the wrong channel. Helen spoke in a way that made everything sound like a memo, precise, warm on the surface, and carrying information between the lines. "Mr. Kingsley would like to see you. 31st floor. You can take the elevator on the east side." Not the 30th. The 31st, which was his private floor. "When?" Emma asked. "Now," Helen said. "Mom." The elevator to 31 required a keycard Emma didn't have. Helen was waiting for her at the lobby level, badge in hand, expression professionally neutral in a way that Emma recognized as being carefully assembled. They rode up together in silence. Emma's apology email sat unsent in her drafts. She'd decided it was better to apologize in person and then send it, or possibly to just apologize in person and then resign, or possibly to simply stop existing as a concept entirely. "Has he?" Emma started. "I wouldn't," Helen said quietly. Not unkindly, just honestly. The 31st floor was quieter than the rest of the building. The carpet was different up here, darker, thicker, and the light came from windows that ran floor to ceiling along the north wall, filling the space with a gray afternoon sky. There was a reception area, a set of closed doors, and not much else. Helen knocked twice on the closed doors and opened them. Adrian Kingsley's office was large without being theatrical about it. One wall was windows. One wall was bookshelves, actual books, not decorative ones, she noticed, though she couldn't have said why she noticed. His desk was a dark wood, clear of almost everything except a laptop and a single framed photograph turned slightly away from visitors. There was a sitting area to one side, 2 chairs, a low table, and on that table, a child's drawing in crayon that someone had put in a glass frame. He was standing at the windows when she came in. His jacket was off, folded over the back of his chair, and his sleeves were rolled to the elbows. He was looking out at the city below with an expression she couldn't read from the doorway. He didn't turn around immediately. Emma stood in the middle of the room. She had prepared several things to say on the elevator: an opening line, a concise apology, a pivot to offering her resignation before he could fire her. All of it had evaporated. "Close the door," he said. He still wasn't looking at her. She did. "Sit down." She sat in one of the 2 chairs near the window because it was the closest one and her legs weren't fully cooperating. He turned. He walked to the desk, didn't sit, leaned against it instead, arms crossed, looking at her with those dark eyes that everyone in the company described as difficult to hold and that she now understood was accurate. Not cruel, not cold, just assessing. The way you'd look at a problem you hadn't categorized yet. "You sent that message to 4,000 people," he said. "Yes." There was no point in any preamble. "I know, it was an accident. I was sending it to a colleague, and the message went to the wrong thread. I'm sorry." She kept her voice even. It cost her something. "I'm genuinely sorry. The things I said were unprofessional and out of line, and I understand if you want—" "What's your name?" he said. She stopped. "Emma Carter. I work in corporate strategy, 22nd floor." "I know what floor you're on." He said it without any particular emphasis. "How long have you been here?" 2 years. He looked at her for a moment. She waited for whatever came next. The termination paperwork, the security escort, something. You said I built this company on other people's labor, he said. Here it was. I did say that. Do you believe it? The question was not what she expected. She held it for a second, turned it over, and made a decision that was probably a mistake. I don't know enough about how you operate to know if it's true, she said. I said it because I was frustrated, not because I'd verified it. She paused. That's still not an excuse. He studied her. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but something less like stone. Tell me about the Hendricks report, he said. She blinked. What? The presentation today. The one you pulled back together after Bradford changed the base assumptions. He picked up something from his desk. A printed copy of the report summary, she realized, with handwritten notes in the margin. Walk me through what you changed and why. She stared at him. Miss Carter, you have the report? I have everything that comes out of corporate strategy. I just don't always have time to ask who actually did the work. He set the papers back down. So, walk me through it. This was the strangest conversation she had ever had in her professional life, and she had once been interviewed for a job by someone who asked her what kind of tree she would be. She walked him through the report. She didn't perform it, didn't oversell it, just explained. The assumptions Bradford had changed, why they'd made the projections unreliable, what she'd corrected and what methodology she'd used and why she'd made the choices she'd made. She talked for maybe 8 minutes. He listened without interrupting, and he listened the way very few people in rooms with power ever listened, like what she was saying actually reached him. When she finished, there was a beat of silence. You have a good instinct for risk modeling, he said. It was so matter-of-fact that it took her a moment to process it as a compliment. Thank you. Bradford's been taking credit for your work before today? She hesitated. That's not... I don't want to make this a yes or no. Yes. He nodded. Like this confirmed something. He reached across his desk and pressed a button on a small console. Helen. Helen's voice came through immediately. Sir? I need you to initiate a transfer in the system for Emma Carter, corporate strategy, 22nd floor. He looked at Emma while he said the next part. She's being reassigned as my personal assistant, effective Monday. Coordinate with HR on the compensation adjustment. Emma's mouth opened, then closed. Sir, I'll get that started, Helen said. The console clicked off. Adrian looked at her calmly, like he'd just rescheduled a meeting. Mr. Kingsley, Emma started, you can call me Adrian in this office. That's okay. Adrian, she stopped. I don't understand what's happening. You sent an embarrassing message to the entire company, he said. Most people in that situation would have been fired. I'm not firing you. I noticed. I'm reassigning you because you're clearly underutilized on 22, and because I need a personal assistant who actually thinks, and because... He paused, and something in his voice shifted just a fraction. Because anyone who's been doing the work Bradford's been signing his name to for 2 years without falling apart is someone I want to know more about. I wrote that you were an expensive suit that learned to give speeches. Yes. You're not... She stopped. You're not angry. He looked at her for a moment, not amused, not offended, just present. I've been called worse, he said. By people who knew me better. Monk. She went home that night and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time without turning on the lights. Priya had texted approximately 47 messages over the course of the afternoon, a running play-by-play that had gone from oh no to wait, what to? Emma. I need you to call me immediately to a string of emojis that didn't translate into any coherent emotion. Emma called her at 8. Personal assistant, Priya said, before Emma could even say hello. His personal assistant. You insulted him in front of the entire company, and he made you his personal assistant. I know. That's insane. I know. That's the most insane thing that has happened in this building in the 2 years I've worked here. And last year, a man from finance accidentally emailed a PDF of his vacation photos to the entire executive team. Priya, I'm processing. I need you to focus. Emma lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. What do you actually know about him? Not the mythology. What do you know? There was a pause. She could hear Priya shifting, getting comfortable, entering what Emma privately called her credible information mode. Okay, Priya said. What I actually know. His wife, ex-wife. Her name was Diana. She left about 3 years ago, maybe 3.5. No official public statement, no drama, just gone. He has full custody of their daughter, Sophie. She's 6, I think. His father, Adrian Kingsley, had a serious cardiac event 4 years ago, which is when Adrian took over the company. Edward's still on the board, but he's not involved day to day. From everything I've seen in HR records, which, to be clear, I should not be discussing, there's almost no turnover on his immediate team. The people who work directly for him stay, which is either because they're very well compensated or because he's actually worth working for. Or both, Emma said. Or both. Emma was quiet for a moment. He knew about the Bradford situation. What? Before today. He knew about Bradford taking credit, or at least suspected it. He had the Hendricks report on his desk. He wanted to know who'd actually done the work. Priya was quiet for a second. Emma. What? I think you might have significantly misjudged this man. I know I insulted him in front of 4,000 people, Priya. I don't need to... That's not what I mean, Priya paused. I mean, I think the story you told yourself about him, the detached billionaire building an empire over people's heads, might not be the whole picture. Emma thought about the framed child's drawing on the coffee table, the handwritten notes in the margins of her report, the way he'd listened. Maybe, she said. She didn't sleep well that night. Monday came the way most consequential Mondays did, indifferent to how ready she was for it. Helen Park walked Emma through the logistics of the new role with the thoroughness of someone who had trained assistants before and knew which details got left out and caused problems later. The office was on 31. She had her own small workspace adjacent to Adrian's office, with a desk, 2 monitors, and a phone with more lines than she'd ever used. She would manage his schedule, coordinate with the department heads, handle correspondence, and essentially operate as a filter between him and everything that wanted his attention, which, at Kingsley Global Holdings, was a formidable and constant stream of things. He travels frequently, Helen said, usually with advance notice, but not always. He prefers briefings in writing when possible. He reads everything, including the things people send hoping he won't. She said this with a look that Emma took as relevant to her specific situation. He is direct to the point where some people find it abrasive. He expects the same directness in return. A pause. And he doesn't tolerate performance. If you don't know something, say so. If you disagree, say so. If you've made an error, say so before he finds it. Emma nodded. That's actually a list of things I'm capable of. Helen looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of approval. I know, she said. I pulled your file before I called you last Tuesday. Emma blinked. Why? Because when he tells me to make a call, I like to know who I'm calling. Helen picked up her tablet. He's in a meeting until 11. He'll want to review the week's schedule at 11:15. Have the calendar pulled up and the Fitzgerald acquisition briefing notes ready. He already has the documents, but he'll want to talk through the timeline. The Fitzgerald acquisition, Emma repeated. She'd heard about it through the 22nd floor grapevine, a potential purchase of a mid-sized logistics company in the southeast, complicated by a family dispute among Fitzgerald's shareholders. I can have notes ready. Good. Helen started toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. Yes? The drawing on the coffee table in his office. Don't move it. Don't straighten it. Don't comment on it unless he does. Emma thought about the crayon drawing in the glass frame. Okay. It's from his daughter. She gave it to him on his first day as CEO. Helen's voice was a matter of fact, but the information felt like something heavier than facts. He's had it there since. She left. Emma sat at her new desk, opened the calendar, and started pulling the briefing notes. Outside the tall windows, the city stretched in every direction, indifferent and enormous and full of people with their own invisible weights. She thought for a moment about a little girl drawing a picture for her father before his first very important day. She put the thought somewhere quiet and got back to work. By the end of the first week, Emma had a working theory about Adrian Kingsley. He was not what she'd written in the message. Not the suit, not the beneficiary of other people's invisible work, not the detached executive performing importance from a safe distance. He was sharper than that, more present than that, and in some ways more exhausting than that because the intelligence she'd glimpsed in their first conversation wasn't a performance. It was just how he operated, all the time, in every meeting and briefing and call, and keeping up with it required Emma to be entirely awake in a way she wasn't accustomed to being at work. He did not manage her the way she'd expected to be managed. He gave her the task, the deadline, and minimal hand-holding. He answered her questions directly. He corrected her when she was wrong, not cruelly, but quickly, the way someone fixes a loose bolt before it causes a larger problem. When she was right, he moved on without ceremony. The first time she pushed back on him directly, a Tuesday morning, regarding a meeting he'd agreed to with a vendor she'd determined was unlikely to close within the quarter, he stopped, looked at her, and said, "Why?" She told him. He looked at the calendar, moved the meeting, didn't say anything else about it. She wasn't sure if that counted as respect or just efficiency. She decided it might be both. She also decided to stop trying to put him in a box she'd built before she knew what she was dealing with. The thing about Adrian Kingsley that no one in the company seemed to fully understand, or that maybe they understood privately and didn't discuss, was that he was tired. Not in the ordinary way. Not in the "I had too many meetings this week" way, or the "this quarter was rough" way. He was tired the way people got tired when they had been carrying something enormous for a very long time without setting it down, and the shape of what they were carrying had become so familiar they'd stopped noticing how heavy it was. Emma noticed. She couldn't have said exactly when or exactly how. She just developed an awareness, the way you developed an awareness of a pattern in data once you'd stared at it long enough. He came in early. He left late. Somewhere in the middle of his days, she knew from the schedule she managed, he had a standing call with Sophie's school. Just a check-in, 5 minutes, sometimes less. He took those calls with the door closed, but she could hear the shift in his voice through the wall. Not softer exactly, but different. A frequency she didn't hear in any other part of his professional life. He had dinner with his daughter 3 times a week without fail. She knew this because those blocks were locked in the calendar with a specificity he didn't apply to anything else. Everything else could be moved, pushed, rescheduled. Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday evenings, non-negotiable. She had never seen him mention this to anyone else, never heard him explain it or reference it in conversation. He simply held that line, quietly, every week, without making it into a statement. By the 3rd week, Emma had stopped thinking of him as the myth at the top of the org chart. She wasn't entirely sure what she thought of him now. The message that started everything was still out there, technically, preserved in the digital amber of company-wide notification history that no amount of retracting could fully erase. People had stopped talking about it openly, but it followed Emma in the way embarrassing things follow you, surfacing in the glances of people she passed in the lobby, in the too careful neutrality of Bradford's expression when she ran into him near the coffee station on 22. "Congratulations on the new role," Bradford said, and the words were entirely correct and entirely hollow. "Thank you," Emma said. She picked up her coffee and went back to the elevator. She pressed 31. She had work to do. On Friday of that 3rd week, Adrian called her into his office at 4 in the afternoon. She came in with her tablet and a notepad out of reflex. He was standing at the window again. She was starting to understand that this was where he went when he was thinking, the same way other people paced or drummed their fingers. "The Fitzgerald trip," he said. Yes. She'd been tracking the negotiations. They'd reached a point where an in-person meeting with the family shareholders in Atlanta was essentially unavoidable. "You're going next Wednesday." "You're coming." She looked up from her tablet. "To Atlanta?" The documentation alone is going to require someone who can read a balance sheet and translate the family dynamics simultaneously. He turned. Can you do that? Read a balance sheet? Yes. Navigate a family dispute while a multi-million-dollar acquisition hangs in the balance? She considered. I've never done it specifically. You'll figure it out. He said it like it was already decided. Helen will send you the logistics. He paused. Pack for 2 nights. These things run long. She made a note. Okay. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. Carter. She turned. He was looking at her with that expression she still hadn't fully decoded, the one that wasn't quite anything she had words for. You've been good at this, he said, better than I expected. It was not, on paper, a particularly effusive thing to say, but coming from him, delivered in that voice that didn't do anything extra, it landed with more weight than she would have predicted. I'm going to assume, she said carefully, that's a high bar. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Not one. The highest, he said. She went back to her desk. She sat down. She opened the Fitzgerald files. She stared at the first line of text for a moment without reading it. The highest. She filed that somewhere quiet, too. The flight to Atlanta was 2 hours and 14 minutes, and Emma spent the first 45 of them working through the Fitzgerald shareholder briefing while Adrian reviewed contracts across the aisle. They didn't talk much. That had become its own kind of comfortable. The silence between them wasn't the strained kind, wasn't the silence of 2 people who didn't know what to say to each other. It was the silence of 2 people who had learned that not every moment needed to be filled. She'd noticed that about him in the weeks since the role had started. He didn't perform conversation, didn't fill empty air with noise just because noise was expected. In meetings, he waited until he had something worth saying, and the people in those rooms always noticed. The stillness before he spoke carried a particular weight, like the moment before a verdict. She'd started doing the same, actually. She wasn't sure when it had happened. The Atlanta office they were meeting at was a converted brick warehouse in Midtown that the Fitzgerald family used as their primary operations hub. Emma had done enough background reading to understand the situation before they walked in. 3 siblings, 1 deceased father's estate, 1 mid-sized logistics company worth approximately $230 million, and a disagreement about what to do with all of it that had been festering for the better part of 18 months. The eldest brother, Robert Fitzgerald, wanted to sell. The youngest, Carter, she'd noted the name with a small private amusement, was resistant. The sister, Marianne, was technically undecided but functionally the deciding vote, which was why she was the one who had agreed to this meeting and why her body language in the first 10 minutes told Emma everything she needed to know. Marianne Fitzgerald was exhausted, not financially, not professionally, personally. She was tired of being the pivot point between her brothers. She was tired of this conversation. She wanted someone to give her a reason to end it. Emma wrote 2 words on the notepad she kept angled so only Adrian could see it. Give her an exit. He glanced down, read it, didn't look at her. But 3 minutes later, when Robert had finished what was essentially a speech, and Carter had finished his counter-speech, and Marianne was sitting very still with her hands folded, Adrian leaned forward slightly and addressed her directly. What would make this feel like a decision you made, he said, rather than one that was made for you? The room went quiet in a different way. Marianne looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time in the meeting, she actually started talking. They were in that room for 4 hours. By the end, they had the framework of an agreement that Robert was cautiously satisfied with, that Carter had begrudgingly accepted, and that Marianne had signed with the look of someone setting down something heavy at a trailhead. In the elevator down, Adrian stood beside Emma and said nothing for a moment, then, "Good read." She was obvious if you were watching the right person. Most people in that room were watching Robert. Robert was performing, Marianne was deciding. Emma shifted her bag on her shoulder. You asked the right question. You told me to ask it. I suggested a direction. You knew how to say it. He looked at her sideways. Something moved behind his eyes. Not the assessing look she'd grown accustomed to, but something a little more like acknowledgement, like she'd said something that landed somewhere real. We should eat something, he said. We haven't since the airport. It was not, she recognized, a particularly smooth segue. But it was honest, and she'd come to understand that honesty was Adrian Kingsley's default mode, even when it was slightly graceless. "Yes," she said. "We should." They found a place 2 blocks from the hotel, a restaurant that was neither trying to impress anyone nor making any apologies for itself, which Emma had privately decided was her favorite kind. They sat at a corner table. She ordered pasta. He ordered a steak that he ate maybe 60% of. They talked about the Fitzgerald negotiation for a while, and then about the next acquisition on the company's radar, and then the conversation drifted in the way conversations did when 2 people had been working beside each other long enough that the professional scaffolding started to relax. "Where are you from originally?" he asked. It was the first personal question he'd ever asked her directly. She looked up. "Ohio. Small city. Nothing remarkable about it. You?" "Born here. Grew up in Connecticut mostly. My father believed in boarding school." He said it without particular bitterness, but without warmth either. Just factual. "You went to state school for finance?" "How do you know that?" "I read your file." "When?" "Before Helen called you." He picked up his glass. "After the message." She turned that over for a moment. He had read her file before deciding to reassign her, before deciding not to fire her. She didn't know what to do with that exactly. It felt significant in a way she couldn't quite name. "I did go to state school," she said. "Scholarship, mostly. My mother worked at a diner. There wasn't exactly a trust fund situation." "And after?" She told him. Not the polished version she gave in interviews, the one where the failures were smoothed into learning experiences and the unemployed months were called a period of professional reflection. She told him the actual version, the bankruptcy, the savings she'd run through, the manager who'd taken her work and claimed it, the months of trying to figure out if she'd made a wrong turn somewhere she couldn't identify. She wasn't sure why she told him the real version. Maybe it was Atlanta. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was 4 hours of watching him navigate a room honestly and deciding that he'd earned honesty back. He listened the way he always listened, fully, without performing sympathy or rushing to the reassuring part. "You kept going," he said when she finished. "I didn't have another option." "That's not true. There were other options. You just didn't take them." She looked at him. "Are you complimenting me?" "I'm being accurate." He set down his fork. "There's a difference." She laughed. Surprised her. The laugh came out before she could decide whether it was appropriate, and it was a real laugh, not a polite one. He looked at her when she laughed, and something in his expression shifted in a way that was brief and complicated and gone before she could examine it. "What about you?" she said. "What about me?" "You never talk about yourself. You ask questions, you answer logically, but you don't actually volunteer anything." She leaned back in her chair. "It's very deliberate." A pause. He wasn't defensive about it. He considered it the same way he considered a problem in a briefing. "Probably," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. He looked toward the window for a moment. The street outside was ordinary Atlanta evening. People walking, traffic, a couple arguing quietly near a parking meter. "My father had a saying. He used to tell us, me and my brother, that information is leverage, and leverage is how the world works. Don't give anyone more than they need to deal with you." Emma was quiet for a moment. "That's a bleak philosophy." "He's a complicated man." "Do you believe it, the leverage thing?" He picked up his glass again, didn't drink from it, just held it. "I believe it's one way the world works. I'm not sure it's the only way." He paused. "I'm not sure I've had enough evidence of the alternatives to know." It was the most honest thing she'd heard him say, and it landed differently than she expected. Not as a confession. He wasn't looking for sympathy, and she could tell, but as something he'd actually examined and wasn't finished examining yet. "For what it's worth," she said carefully, "the way you read that room today had nothing to do with leverage." He looked at her. "Marianne needed someone to see her, not her vote. You saw her." She shrugged slightly. "That's not leverage. That's just attention, the real kind." He didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the couple near the parking meter had apparently resolved whatever it was, because the woman laughed at something, and the man put his arm around her, and they walked away. You're very direct, Adrian said. You told Helen to tell me to be direct. I'm complying with instructions. That almost smile again. Fair enough. They walked back to the hotel through the Atlanta evening, not talking much, the comfortable silence back in place. The hotel was a mid-range business property the company used for out-of-town negotiations. Not lavish, functional. Emma had a reservation on the 8th floor. She'd confirmed it that morning. At the front desk, the clerk looked at her name, looked at his screen, and then looked up with the specific expression of someone delivering news they would rather not deliver. Miss Carter, he said. There was a system error this afternoon with the reservation software. Several rooms were double booked, and we've had to make some adjustments. He glanced between her and Adrian. Mr. Kingsley's suite has 2 bedrooms. We've comped your room and upgraded the suite at no charge, but we unfortunately don't have a separate room available at this time. Every room in the hotel is occupied. Emma turned to look at Adrian. He looked at the clerk. Is there another hotel nearby? We've already called. There's a conference in town. The rooms within a 3-block radius are all fully booked. The clerk was visibly uncomfortable. I'm genuinely sorry for the inconvenience. The suite does have a private bedroom on each end. We can have additional towels and amenities sent up. There was a beat of silence. It's fine, Adrian said. He picked up the key cards. He handed one to Emma without any particular ceremony. It's a suite. We're adults. Emma took the key card. Right. She told herself that the slight warmth in her face was from the Atlanta heat still on her skin from the walk over. The suite was on the 14th floor, and it was, as described, designed for 2 people who needed to share a space without sharing too much of it. 2 bedrooms on opposite ends of a common area, living room, small dining table, a kitchenette that had a coffee maker Emma immediately identified as her primary interest. The rooms were connected but didn't have to be. She put her bag in her room, changed out of the blazer she'd worn through 10 hours of travel and negotiation, and came back out to the common area in jeans and a plain shirt. Adrian had done the same. He was at the dining table with his laptop open, jacket gone, in a dark gray shirt with his sleeves rolled up the way he wore them in his office when he'd been at it long enough to stop performing. She made coffee. She brought a cup to the table, set it near his elbow without asking, and sat across from him with her tablet. He looked at the coffee. Thank you. You look like you needed it. I always look like I need it. You usually do. She opened the Fitzgerald follow-up notes she'd started on the plane. I want to get the summary drafted tonight while it's fresh. The board will want a full report. Send it to me when you're done. I'll review before we send it up. They worked in silence for a while, the real kind of silence that existed between people who had gotten past the stage where they needed noise to prove they were comfortable. The city was quiet outside at this hour. The coffee was better than she'd expected. Sometime around 11, Emma closed her tablet. Not because she was done, but because her brain had stopped processing information in useful ways, and she'd learned, slowly and with evidence, that pushing past that point produced bad work. She realized Adrian had stopped typing too. He was sitting back in his chair, looking at the middle distance with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the assessing look, not the near smile, not the professional neutral. Something quieter, older somehow. You okay? She said. She asked it before deciding whether she should. He looked at her like the question had surprised him, not unpleasantly, just unexpectedly. Sophie had a rough day at school, he said. Emma waited. Another kid told her she didn't have a real family because she didn't have a mother. He said it in the same voice he used for everything, measured, not performing, but something underneath it wasn't measured at all. Her teacher called me at 3. Sophie told her it was fine. It wasn't fine. Emma held the words for a moment before responding. What did you say to her? When you talked to her tonight? I told her that real families were the ones that showed up. He paused. She asked if I thought her mom was ever coming back. The room felt very still. What did you say? Emma asked quietly. I said I didn't know. I said that whatever happened, I was there, and I wasn't going anywhere. He looked down at his coffee cup, which had been empty for a while. I don't know if that was the right thing to say. I think it was the honest thing. Sometimes those aren't the same. No, she agreed. But with kids, I think they usually need the honest version more than the clean one, even when it's hard. She paused. She's lucky to have someone who shows up. He looked at her for a moment. How do you know? You haven't met her. Because you move 3 standing appointments for her every week, and you take her school calls with the door closed like they're the most important calls you get. Emma kept her voice even. That's not accidental. That's someone who decided what mattered. He was quiet for a long time. Not the thinking through a problem quiet. Something more internal than that. Her mother left because I wasn't present enough, he said finally. That was the core of it. I was 30 years old and running a company in crisis, and I thought presence meant providing, financially, structurally. I thought if the material things were handled, everything else would sort itself. He exhaled slowly. It didn't. People don't sort themselves, Emma said. No. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she'd never seen from him before, something unguarded about it. When Diana left, Sophie was 3. Old enough to notice, not old enough to understand. I didn't handle it well at first. I handled it the only way I knew how. I worked more, because at least work gave me a result I could see. He stopped. I figured out eventually that I was making the same mistake twice. Emma thought about a little girl, 3 years old, in a house that had gone quiet in a specific way. She thought about a father who'd figured it out eventually, which wasn't the same as figuring it out immediately, but was still, she believed, something. You changed, she said. I'm still changing. That counts. He looked at her across the table. The Atlanta night was very quiet. The coffee maker on the counter ticked as it cooled. There was something in this moment that Emma recognized as fragile, not in a bad way, but in the way that real things were sometimes fragile. Because they were real. Because they'd been made without armor. You don't talk about yourself the way most people do, he said. What do you mean? Most people, when they share something, they're waiting for a response, watching your face to see if they've gotten it right. You just, he paused. Say the thing. She considered that. I've spent most of my adult life not having a lot of margin for error. I think that teaches you to skip the performance. How so? When things are tight, money, resources, options, you stop having the luxury of saying what sounds good. You just have to say what's true and deal with whatever comes from it. She looked at the table. It's not a virtue. It's just what happens when you can't afford the alternative. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I had the opposite experience. Everything I said was watched and weighed and used by someone. My father, the board, the press. You learn to control information because the cost of not controlling it is always higher than the cost of staying closed. That sounds lonely. He didn't answer immediately, which was, she'd come to understand, its own kind of answer. It is, he said. Some days more than others. She should have said something practical after that, acknowledged it, and moved to neutral ground. That would have been the professional thing, the safe thing. Instead, she stayed in the moment with him, in the quiet of that suite, with the Atlanta night outside and the emotional residue of a long day between them. And she said, I think you've been carrying a lot for a long time. He looked at her. His eyes were very dark in the low light of the room, and for a moment he didn't look like the CEO of anything. He looked like someone who was tired and had been pretending not to be. Probably, he said. That's actually an answer this time, she said. He made a sound that might, in better lighting and a less weighted context, have been a laugh. They went to their separate rooms not long after that. Emma lay in the dark with her hands on her chest and thought about leverage and loneliness and little girls who asked hard questions. And she was conscious of something shifting inside her that she didn't have a name for yet and wasn't ready to examine. She just knew things were different now. Between them, something had moved. She wasn't sure what to do about that. She wasn't sure she needed to do anything yet. She went to sleep. She dreamed about Ohio and about her mother's diner and about all the ways people learn to carry their own weight and the strange grace of occasionally setting it down. In the morning, she woke up before her alarm. She went to the common area. Adrian was already there, at the table, with coffee made and a newspaper he wasn't reading. He looked up. I made enough for 2, he said. She got a cup. She sat across from him. The Atlanta sun was coming in through the east-facing windows, and it wasn't particularly romantic or cinematic. It was just morning light on a regular table in a business hotel, two people at the start of a long workday. But she poured her coffee, and he turned back to the newspaper, and outside the city was waking up in its ordinary way. And something between them was both exactly what it had always been and not quite the same as it had been before. Neither of them said anything about that. They didn't need to yet. The flight back was smoother than the flight down. They debriefed on the Fitzgerald meeting for the first hour. Emma finished the follow-up report somewhere over the Carolinas, and Adrian reviewed it, made 2 comments, approved it, and sent it to the board without any additional changes. "Good work," he said, which was what he always said, but this time she noticed he said it differently. Not the way you confirmed a task was completed, but the way you acknowledged a person. She looked out the window at the clouds below, white and enormous and indifferent to everything happening above and beneath them. She thought about what he'd said the night before. It is. Some days more than others. She thought about the framed drawing on the coffee table in his office. She thought about Sophie at 6 years old asking if her mother was coming back. She thought about herself at 6, in a house where a father-shaped absence had been present so long she'd stopped noticing it, and her mother who never talked about it and never stopped working, and who had taught Emma, without meaning to and without any particular philosophy, that you held on by holding on. She thought about what Priya had said on the phone 3 weeks ago. "I think you might have significantly misjudged this man." She had. That was clear now. But what was less clear, and what she turned over quietly for the rest of the flight, was what it meant that she'd misjudged him. Because she'd built her emotional distance on a foundation that had turned out to be incorrect. And now that foundation was gone, and she wasn't entirely sure what she was standing on instead. When they landed, a car was waiting. It took them back to the city in the early evening traffic, stopping at his building first. He got out, then paused with the door open. "Monday," he said, which meant "see you Monday," which was how he said goodbye when things were normal. "Monday," she said. He closed the door. She watched him walk into the building, and she noticed, not for the first time but in a clearer way than before, that he walked like someone who carried things he never put down. The car took her to her building. She went upstairs. She sat at her kitchen table with the lights on and the quiet of her apartment around her, and she opened her laptop and stared at the screen without seeing it. Her phone buzzed. "Priya, how was Atlanta? Did the Fitzgerald thing close?" Emma typed back. "Framework's done. Should close in 6 weeks. And how was traveling with him?" She stared at the screen for a moment. "Different," she typed finally. "Different how?" She thought about how to answer that. About the sweet and the coffee and the conversation that had happened in the quiet way that real conversations happened, without any agenda or performance. About a little girl at school being told she didn't have a real family. About a man who'd figured out his mistake eventually, which was late but was still something. "Just different," she typed. "I'll tell you later." She put the phone face down on the table. She sat with the word for a while. Different. It wasn't enough of a word for what had happened. But it was honest, and honest was what she had. And she'd learned a long time ago that sometimes you started with what you had. The Fitzgerald deal closed in 5 weeks, 1 week ahead of the projection Emma had built into the report. The board sent a congratulatory memo. Adrian forwarded it to her with a single line. "Good work on the timeline." She saved the email without fully understanding why. That was the week everything between them changed, though she wouldn't have been able to point to a single moment as the cause. It was more like the way weather changed, a slow accumulation of pressure, invisible until it wasn't. It started with small things. The way he had started saving her the seat to his left in board meetings, without commenting on it or making it into a thing, just pulling the chair out slightly when she came in, the way people did for people they expected. The way he remembered, without being reminded, that she took her coffee with 1 sugar and no milk, and that she skipped lunch when she was deep in a problem and needed someone to put food on her desk or she'd forget to eat entirely. The way he had started, gradually and then all at once, treating her less like a professional resource and more like a person he was genuinely glad was in the room. She noticed all of it. She cataloged it the way she cataloged data, carefully, without rushing to conclusions, watching for the pattern that would tell her what she was actually looking at. The pattern told her something she wasn't sure she was ready for. 6 weeks after Atlanta, on a Thursday evening when everyone else had gone home and the 31st floor was quiet and the city outside was doing its amber and gray thing that it did at 6 p.m. in autumn, Adrian came to the doorway of her workspace and leaned against the frame. "You're still here," he said. "You're still here," she pointed out. "I live here." "You have a very expensive apartment that suggests otherwise." He almost smiled. "The Morrison projections?" "The Morrison projections." She leaned back in her chair. "The Q3 numbers are clean, but the Q4 assumptions are optimistic in a way that's going to make the board nervous. I'm trying to build a version that's honest without being discouraging. Those aren't always compatible." "I know. I'm working on it." She looked at him in the doorway. He looked tired, the kind of tired that showed up in the eyes before anywhere else, and she'd gotten good at reading his eyes. "Sophie okay?" Something in his face shifted at the name. "She made me a card today, drew a picture of the two of us." He pulled out his phone, turned the screen to show her, a crayon drawing, tits, two figures, one tall and one small, both with enormous smiles, standing under something that might have been a sun or might have been a flower. "Me and Daddy," it said in unsteady letters across the top. Emma looked at it for a moment. "She gave the tall one better hair than you actually have." He looked down at the phone. "She gave me a cape." "You're a superhero in her drawings." He put the phone away. Something about the gesture was careful, like he was putting something valuable back somewhere safe. "She asked about you, he said. Emma looked up. "About me?" "She knows I have a new assistant. She's asked before, but I haven't talked about work much with her, but she asked specifically." He paused. "She wanted to know if you were nice." "What did you tell her?" "I said you were the most direct person I'd ever worked with." He said it like it meant something, like directness was a virtue he'd been in short supply of finding. She said that sounded nice to her. Emma was quiet for a moment. 6 years old and making judgments about her father's people with the unerring instinct of children who watched everything. "She sounds like she has good instincts," Emma said. "She gets them from her mother," he said. Then immediately something tightened in his expression. Not regret exactly, but the complicated look of someone who'd said something true that was also complicated. Or maybe from somewhere else, I don't know. Emma didn't fill the silence. She let it sit. "Emma," he said. She looked at him. He was still in the doorway. The city behind the windows was going darker, and the office lights were doing that thing they did in the evenings where they turned the glass reflective so you could see both the outside and the room at the same time. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need to say it before I talk myself out of it." She put her pen down. "I'm aware that you work for me," he said, "and I'm aware of what that means, and I'm not saying this to create a situation that isn't fair to you." He stopped. "But I think you know that something has changed, and I think pretending otherwise is something I'm tired of doing." The room was very quiet. "What are you saying?" she asked. She asked it carefully, not because she didn't understand, but because she needed him to say it without her finishing it for him. He held her eyes. "I'm saying I don't know when it happened exactly, somewhere between Atlanta and now, possibly before Atlanta." A pause. "I'm saying that when I look for you in a room, I find you, and when you're not in the room, I notice." He exhaled slowly. "I don't know what to do with that, but I know that not saying it was starting to feel dishonest." She sat for a long time without answering. Outside, a siren passed, distant, moving away. "I noticed too," she said finally. She said it to the desk first, then looked up. "I don't know what to do with it either." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then he said, "Finish the Morrison projections. I'll review them in the morning." "Yes," she said. He pushed off from the doorframe. He went back to his office. She heard the quiet sounds of him at his desk, the keyboard, the occasional shift of his chair. She picked up her pen. She sat there for probably 10 minutes before her brain went back to Q4 assumptions. She stayed until 7:30. She left the projections on his desk. She took the elevator down and walked out into the autumn air and told herself she was handling this. She wasn't sure she was handling it, but she was still upright, which seemed like a start. What followed was not a romance in the conventional sense. There was no dramatic declaration, no cinematic moment where everything clicked into place and became simple. It was quieter than that, more tentative, shaped by two people who had both been hurt in ways that made them careful. He texted her one Saturday morning, not about work. A photograph of Sophie's drawing from school, a new one, this time with 3 figures, one of them smaller than the original 2. She added a dog, he wrote. We don't have a dog. Emma laughed at her kitchen table. Maybe she's making suggestions, she wrote back. Subtle, he sent. Children are never subtle, she wrote. They're just honest without knowing it's unusual. He sent back a single word, true. That was how it started. And texted photographs of crayon drawings and conversations that lasted past midnight on nights when they both happened to still be awake. When Emma was reading in her apartment and he was in his study after Sophie was in bed, and the city outside both their windows was doing the same quiet thing. They didn't name it, didn't put edges around it. Emma wasn't sure whether that was wisdom or cowardice, and she suspected it might be both. But there was something between them that was real, and she held on to that, the realness of it, in the moments when the rest of it felt uncertain. They kissed for the first time on a Tuesday evening in November, which was nothing like the month for romantic moments, and everything like the kind of thing that happened when two people had been circling something long enough that one of them finally stopped circling. They had been going over the Morrison presentation in his office, the final version, the one that was going to the board the next morning. She'd caught an error in slide 11, a transposed decimal that would have made the Q4 numbers look 20% worse than they were, and she'd been quietly pleased about catching it, and he'd leaned over her shoulder to look at the screen and said, "Good catch." And when he stood back up, they were closer than they'd meant to be. She looked at him. He looked at her. And then he kissed her. Briefly, quietly, in the way of someone who had thought about doing something for a long time and had finally decided the thinking was no longer useful. She kissed him back. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. When they separated, neither of them said anything immediately. The office was exactly as it had been 30 seconds ago, and also completely different. She started. Stay, he said. Then immediately, I'm not. He stopped. Something flickered across his face that she'd never seen there before. Genuine uncertainty, the unguarded kind. I just meant the presentation. I know, she said. They finished the presentation. He sat on one side of the desk and she sat on the other, and they went through every slide, and neither of them mentioned what had happened, and Emma thought, this is either the beginning of something or the beginning of a very complicated problem. By December, she understood it was both. The thing about loving someone powerful was that their fears were also powerful. Emma had grown up understanding scarcity, of money, of options, of the kind of security that other people seemed to have by default. But Adrian's fear was a different shape. He had abundance in every material sense and a scarcity that was internal, of trust, of the willingness to be seen in ways he couldn't control. He was warm with her in private. He was fully present, more present than she'd imagined he could be. He listened. He remembered. He showed up in the small, consistent ways that Emma had learned mattered more than any grand gesture. He called her when he knew she was working late, not to check in on the work, but to talk. And they talked about things that didn't belong in any professional context. His memories of his grandmother's house in Maine, her memories of summer in Ohio when the heat made everything go slow, and the days felt like they lasted a week. He told her one night that she was the first person he'd talked to about Diana. Really talked, not the clipped version he gave to colleagues who asked politely. He told her it had been a marriage that had good years and then had been strangled slowly by his absence, not deliberate but consistent, and that he'd understood too late that you couldn't love someone through your schedule. She told him about a man she'd dated in her mid-20s who had been kind and smart, and who she'd let go because she'd been too afraid of needing someone during a period when she was barely keeping herself together, and how she still didn't know whether that had been self-preservation or self-sabotage, and probably it had been both. We're both better at recognizing mistakes in retrospect, he said. Most people are, she said. I'd like to be better at recognizing them in real time. She'd looked at him then, at his profile against the city lights outside his study window, at the particular quality of his face when he said something he actually meant, And she'd thought, me too. God, me too. But in public, he was different. She hadn't noticed it at first because they didn't exist in public together in any meaningful way. Their relationship was a private thing, contained in offices and late-night texts and Saturday mornings when he drove Sophie to her dance class and then called Emma from the parking lot while he waited, because he had an hour and he'd rather spend it on the phone with her than scrolling through industry news. She noticed it first at the company's year-end gala in December. It was a large event, several hundred people, the kind of gathering where Kingsley Global Holdings reminded its employees and partners that it was very much a functioning empire. Emma attended as part of the executive team, which was her role, which was entirely appropriate. She wore a deep green dress she'd bought on sale and spent too much on. She felt good in it. She arrived early to handle the logistics she'd spent 3 weeks coordinating, and when Adrian came in, she was near the entrance with a tablet and a headset, managing the last-minute adjustments the way she always managed things, efficiently, without drama. He saw her. Their eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, something passed between them that was entirely private and entirely real. And then it was gone. And he was Adrian Kingsley, CEO of Kingsley Global Holdings, shaking hands with the first of approximately 200 people who would want 5 minutes of his time tonight. She understood. She did. It was a company event. He was in a public role. None of that was unreasonable, but over the course of the evening, she watched him. She watched him work the room with the practiced ease of someone who had learned young how to be public. She watched him talk to board members and partners and the people whose names appeared in business publications. And she watched, as the evening went on, the way he navigated the company of Celeste Vane, the daughter of one of the company's oldest investors, a woman in her mid-30s who wore her money like a second skin and who looked at Adrian the way people looked at things they'd already decided they were going to have. Celeste was not subtle. She stood close, touched his arm when she laughed, positioned herself at his side for photographs in a way that was clearly rehearsed, and Adrian did not encourage it. Emma watched carefully enough to see that, but he also didn't move away. He smiled when it was polite to smile. He accepted the proximity. Emma went home early. She told Helen she had a headache, which was half true. The other half was harder to name. She didn't say anything about it. She sat with it for a few days, turned it over, tried to decide if she was being reasonable or unreasonable, if what she felt was justified or jealousy, and the honest answer was that it was probably all of those things simultaneously. Adrian texted the next morning. "You left early. Everything okay?" She wrote back, "Headache. All the logistics went fine." He wrote, "I noticed you left." She stared at that for a moment. "I noticed," she wrote back. "Good night." She wasn't sure if that was productive or petty. She decided it was honest, which was all she had, and went to sleep. January came, and then February, and the thing that had been unnamed between them had weight now. She could feel it in the way the days organized themselves around it, in the way she measured time by the conversations rather than the calendar. She was happy, in the complicated way that happiness came when it was threaded with uncertainty. Real, but also fragile, like something you held carefully because you knew it could break. She met Sophie in February. It wasn't planned. She'd come to the 31st floor on a Saturday to pick up documents she'd forgotten, which she would later recognize as the universe operating in its characteristically indirect way. Sophie was there because her regular weekend caretaker had called in sick, and Adrian had no other option on short notice. Sophie Kingsley was 6 years old, with her father's dark eyes and a serious quality to her face that dissolved completely when she smiled, and she was sitting at the small table in Adrian's office with a coloring book and approximately 47 crayons. She looked up when Emma came in. "Are you Emma?" she asked. Emma stopped. "I am. How did you know?" "Daddy said the person he works with is really direct." She considered Emma gravely. "You look like someone who would be direct." "That's a very observant thing to say." "I'm observant," Sophie said, without a trace of boastfulness, just fact. She picked up a blue crayon. "Do you want a color? I have an extra book." Adrian, from his desk across the room, looked at Emma with an expression she would spend a long time thinking about later. Something warm and unguarded and terrified all at once, like a person who had two very important things in the same room and suddenly understood how much he had to lose. Emma sat down at the small table. She took the extra coloring book. Sophie pushed the crayon box toward her. They colored for 45 minutes. Sophie talked the entire time, about her dance class and the drawing she was working on for her teacher, and the dog she wanted but didn't have, and how she thought the color orange was underrated. Emma listened, asked questions, and colored a sunset over a mountain range while a 6-year-old explained to her, at some length, the geopolitical situation of her classroom. When Emma finally got up to go, Sophie said, "Will you come back?" Emma looked at Adrian. He was watching from his desk, the Kingsley composure carefully assembled, but his eyes were doing the thing they did when something had gotten past the composure. "I'll probably be here Monday," Emma said. "That's not the weekend," Sophie said. "No," Emma agreed. "It's not." She picked up her forgotten documents and left. On the elevator down, she stood very still and tried to identify what she was feeling, and what she came up with was something like, "I am in significant trouble." She was right, as it turned out. March arrived with the particular cruelty of a month that promised spring and delivered rain, and it was in March that Emma started understanding the shape of the thing she'd walked into. The company held a quarterly leadership dinner, smaller than the gala, more exclusive, a sit-down event at a restaurant that cost more per plate than Emma's first month's rent at her current apartment. It was a legitimate business event. She was there in her role. She handled the seating arrangements. She put herself at the secondary table because that was appropriate. She watched from there as Celeste Vane arrived. She was the daughter of Harrison Vane, who held 12% of Kingsley Global Holdings and was therefore a legitimate guest, and seated herself next to Adrian with the ease of someone who had done it before. Emma watched Adrian. He was polished, appropriate, professional. He caught Emma's eye once across the room and held it for a moment. Then Celeste said something and he turned back. It was nothing. Emma knew it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing either, and the difference between those two things was where the trouble lived. She talked to Priya about it the following week over lunch in the building's cafe. She didn't say everything. There were things she wasn't ready to say out loud, things that belonged to her and Adrian and nowhere else. But she said enough. "He keeps you private," Priya said carefully. She wasn't judging, Emma could tell. She was processing. "Not hidden exactly, but private," Emma said. "Yes." "And at events? He's appropriate, professional. He doesn't—" She stopped. "He doesn't do anything wrong." "But?" Emma looked at her coffee. "But I watch him in those rooms and I can see how easily he inhabits that world. The Celeste Vanes of it. The people who exist in his actual social universe. And then I go home to my apartment with my one good blazer and I think about what I actually am to him." "What do you think you are to him?" "I think I'm real," Emma said. "I think what's between us is the realest thing in his life right now." She paused. "I also think he doesn't know what to do with real in public." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Have you talked to him about it?" "Not directly." "Emma, I know." She did know. She'd been avoiding it the way you avoided pressing on something that hurt. Not because you didn't know it was there, but because you were afraid of what pressing would confirm. She pressed in March on a Wednesday, after a board dinner where she'd spent 3 hours being professionally competent and personally invisible. She went to his office after. He was still there. He was always still there. "I need to ask you something," she said. He looked up. Something in her voice had told him this wasn't about work. He closed his laptop. "Okay." "What is this?" She gestured between them. She hated that she was asking. She asked anyway. "What are we?" He was quiet for a moment, not the productive kind of quiet, the kind where he was figuring out how to answer in a way that was honest without being the thing she needed to hear. "Emma, I'm not asking for a label. I'm not asking you to announce anything to anyone." She kept her voice level. It cost her. "I'm asking whether this is something you're actually in, or whether it's something that exists only when there's no one around to see it." The words sat between them, heavy and exact. He stood up. He came around the desk. He stood in front of her with his hands in his pockets, which was the posture he had when something was difficult, and he was trying not to perform how difficult it was. "You know how I feel about you," he said. "I know what you've said in private." "That's real." "I know it's real." She held his eyes. But real needs to exist somewhere other than just here. Just us. Just when no one is watching. A pause. I don't need you to put us on a magazine cover. I need to know that I'm not something you're ashamed of. The word landed hard. She saw it land. You're not, he started. Then why hasn't anything changed? Why is Celeste Vane sitting next to you at every formal event? Why have I met your daughter but not one other person in your actual life? She exhaled. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to understand. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture she'd come to recognize as the one he made when the composure was genuinely compromised. It's complicated. I know it's complicated. Tell me why. Because the moment it's public, he stopped. The press, my father, the board. They already have opinions about every decision I make, about Sophie, about the company, about what my personal life should look like. He paused. There are expectations about who I should be seen with, about what the right image looks like for the company, and I know it sounds like you're more worried about your image than about us, she said. Silence. He didn't say it wasn't true. That was the part that hurt the most. I need time, he said. I've been giving you time, she said. Emma, I know. She picked up her bag. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it for being steady, because the inside of her chest was not steady at all. I'm not leaving. I'm not making an ultimatum. I'm just telling you that I see what's happening, and I need you to know I see it. She paused at the door. Because I think someone should be honest with you about what it looks like from where I'm standing. She left. She went home. She sat on her couch with the lights off for a while, and she let herself feel the thing she'd been carefully not fully feeling for the past several months, which was the fear that she had walked into something she couldn't walk out of cleanly, and that the man she'd fallen in love with, because she was going to say it to herself, alone in the dark, she had fallen in love with him, was afraid of her. Not her specifically, but what she represented, what choosing her publicly would cost him, or what he believed it would cost. She thought about Priya's voice. I think you might have significantly misjudged this man. She had, but not in the direction she'd originally thought. She'd misjudged him in the harder direction. She'd thought he was less than he was, and then discovered he was more. And now she was discovering there were limits to the more, and limits were the hardest thing to see in someone you loved. Her phone buzzed at 11:15. Adrian. I'm sorry, the message said. For tonight, for not having a better answer. She looked at it for a long time. I know, she typed back. I don't want to lose this. She stared at that, at the word this, which was the word he used when he couldn't quite bring himself to say the thing the word stood for. Then don't, she wrote. She put her phone down. It was April when Lucas Kingsley came back into the company's orbit. She'd known he existed. Adrian's cousin, 5 years older, who had spent the last several years running the European division of the family empire from an office in London. He was coming back to New York to take over as head of the real estate subsidiary, which was being restructured in a way that required someone who understood both the business and the family, and Lucas, apparently, was both. Emma knew this because she'd been briefed on it, because everything that touched the 31st floor passed through her desk first. She'd prepared his office setup, coordinated his onboarding with HR, arranged his first meeting with the executive team. She knew him on paper before she knew him as a person. She met him on the first Tuesday in April, in the conference room on 30, when he came in 20 minutes early and she was still setting up. You must be Emma, he said. He was tall, with lighter features than Adrian. Brown hair, easier smile, the particular confidence of someone who didn't feel the need to establish it. He stuck out his hand. Lucas Kingsley, I've heard good things. She shook it. From who? Adrian. He said it simply, without any particular weight. He mentioned his assistant was very good. He's careful about who he says that about. Emma filed that somewhere. Good flight from London? Tolerable, I hate flying. He said it without self-consciousness, looking around the conference room with the look of a person taking the measure of a space he'd be spending time in. This room is too cold. Can someone adjust the temperature? I'll have facilities do it before the meeting. I'd appreciate it. He looked at her. How long have you been here? Almost a year in this role, 2 years with the company overall. And before the assistant role? Corporate strategy, 22nd floor. He nodded. How'd you end up with Adrian? He asked it with a directness that she recognized as being native to his personality rather than aggressive. Just a man who asked what he wanted to know. She almost laughed. That's a longer story. We have 20 minutes before anyone else arrives. She looked at him. He had the kind of face that was very easy to read. Not because it was simple, but because he wasn't trying to obscure it. Open in the way Adrian was closed. Not shallow. She could tell within 2 minutes he wasn't shallow. Just uncomplicated in his relationship with being known. Maybe another time, she said. He smiled. Fair enough. The meeting went well. Lucas was effective in a way that was different from Adrian. Less compressed intensity, more movement, comfortable with consensus in a way that Adrian wasn't. They weren't alike, but she could see, watching them across the table from each other, the strain of family between them. Affection that was also complicated by proximity, by history, by the particular weight of having grown up in the same universe of expectations. After the meeting, Lucas stopped by her desk on his way out. Good work in there, he said. The prep materials were exactly right. That's my job. Sure, but you can do your job badly or well. You do it well. He picked up his jacket from the chair across from her desk. Are you free for lunch Friday? I want to pick your brain about the restructuring timeline. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. A professional lunch. It was a professional lunch. Friday works, she said. Good. He smiled, easy, uncalculated. I'll have my assistant make a reservation. He left. Emma looked at her screen. She thought about Adrian across the hall, in his office, with the door half open, and about the conversation they'd had in March, and about the word this and all the weight it carried without quite being the word it stood for. She went back to work. She didn't think about Lucas Kingsley again until Friday, and then she did. The Friday lunch with Lucas was at a restaurant 3 blocks from the building, a quiet Italian place with good natural light and no pretension about itself, the kind of place chosen by someone who wanted to actually talk rather than be seen talking. Emma noticed the choice. It told her something. Lucas was already there when she arrived, which she also noticed. He'd ordered water for the table and was reading something on his phone that he put away without ceremony when she sat down. No performance of being busy, no calculated delay. Just a man who had arrived on time and was paying attention when she got there. I ordered bread, he said. I hope that's okay. I'm incapable of sitting at a table in an Italian restaurant without ordering bread. That's a reasonable incapability, Emma said. My only one, I promise. He smiled, and there was something self-aware in it. He knew he was easy to be around, and he wore it lightly rather than using it. How's the week been? Long. The Morrison integration is generating a lot of follow-up questions from the subsidiary teams. It always does when you acquire a family business. The existing staff spend the first 3 months convinced they're about to be replaced. Are they? Some of them. That's the part nobody wants to say out loud in the first 3 months. He picked up the menu briefly, set it back down. Adrian handles that part well, actually. Better than my uncle did. Edward used to let the uncertainty drag. Adrian moves faster, not always right, but faster, which at least stops the hemorrhage. She studied him for a moment. He talked about Adrian the way you talked about someone you respected and had complicated feelings about, straightforwardly, without either protecting him or undermining him. You're close? She asked. We grew up close. Summers together, family events, the full Kingsley dynasty experience. He pulled a piece of bread apart. We drifted when I went to London. Different offices, different time zones, different problems. I think we both assumed there'd be time to close the distance later. He paused. There's always that assumption, isn't there? That later is a real place you can get to. Emma thought about her own version of that. The relationships she'd deferred, the conversations she'd saved for someday. It's a common mistake. It is. He looked at her. Adrian said you've changed how his office runs. He said that? In a compliment-shaped way. He doesn't give those casually, so I took note. Lucas leaned back slightly. He said you were the first person who'd told him something he didn't want to hear and been right about it. Emma thought about the message. 4,312 employees. The expensive suit that learned to give speeches. I had an unconventional start, she said. I heard. He looked at her with the frank curiosity of someone who wasn't pretending he hadn't. The message. Yes. Good instinct, wrong channel. She laughed despite herself. That's the most generous framing anyone's offered. It's the accurate framing. He picked up his water. You were right about the core observation. Adrian does carry an image that's partly constructed. Most people in his position do. The question is whether the construction is hiding something or protecting something. She looked at him carefully. What do you think it is? I think it started as protection and became habit. And habits are harder to break than intentions. He said it without judgment, the way you stated a fact about someone you'd watched long enough to see the pattern clearly. He's better than he used to be, but he still flinches when something feels too exposed. Emma was quiet. I'm saying this, Lucas said, because I think you know him well enough now to have your own read on it, and because you look like someone who's sitting with something they haven't quite resolved. She looked at him. You've known me for 4 days. I know, but I pay attention. He said it simply. You don't have to tell me anything. I'm not asking. Then what are you doing? He considered that honestly. I'm telling you that if you ever need someone to talk to who knows both the context and the people involved, I'm available. Not as Adrian's cousin, just as someone who's around. She looked at him for a long moment. He held it without flinching, without making it into more than it was. Okay, she said. Good. He picked up the menu again. Now, tell me what you actually think about the restructuring timeline, because the numbers I was given before I left London don't match what I'm seeing on the ground. She told him. They talked for an hour and 15 minutes, and by the end of it, Emma understood that Lucas Kingsley was one of those people who was as intelligent as they appeared, but carried it without needing you to notice. He asked real questions and listened to the answers and pushed back when he disagreed, and when she caught an error in his restructuring assumptions, he said, You're right, I missed that, without a second's hesitation. She walked back to the building thinking that she'd made a useful professional contact and a possible friend. That was April. By May, she understood it was also something else, though the something else was not what she expected, and not what complicated things in the way she anticipated. What happened in May was Adrian. He found out about the Friday lunches. There had been 3 by then, each one ostensibly about the restructuring, and each one also just 2 people who got along well and found each other's company useful. And he found out in the worst possible way, which was by seeing them through the window of the Italian place on a Friday when he was walking back from a meeting. He said nothing about it that Friday. He said nothing the following Monday or Tuesday. Emma could feel it, the change in the air of the office, a particular quality of quiet that wasn't the comfortable kind. On Wednesday, he closed his office door in the afternoon, which he almost never did when it was just the 2 of them on the floor. She knocked. Come in. She came in. He was at his desk, not looking at the door, working through something on his laptop with the focus of a man trying very hard to appear focused. You saw us, she said. He looked up. At the restaurant, Friday. She kept her voice level. You were going to let it sit there? I don't have a right to an opinion about it, he said. He said it the way someone said something they'd rehearsed but didn't fully believe. That's not an answer. Emma? Adrian. She sat down across from him, uninvited. You don't have a right to be upset about me having lunch with a colleague and also refuse to be seen with me publicly. You don't get both of those positions at the same time. He was quiet for a long moment. Something was working behind his eyes. The processing she'd learned to recognize. The place where he went when he was trying to be honest with himself and finding it difficult. I know, he said. Then say the real thing. He exhaled, closed the laptop. I don't like it. I know I don't have standing to not like it. Both of those things are true simultaneously. Why don't you like it? Because Lucas, he stopped. Because he's easier than me, I know that. He doesn't have the things I have, the weight of it, the scrutiny, He paused. He can just be a person. He's never had to be careful about it the way I have. That's not a flaw in him, Emma said. I know it's not. He said it quietly. That's what I don't like. She looked at him. at the man she'd spent the better part of a year learning, all the layers of him, the brilliant and the broken and the exhausted and the tender parts he showed only in private. She felt all of that, fully, in that moment. And she also felt the other thing, the thing she'd been feeling since March, since the word this and all its insufficient weight. "I love you," she said. She said it the way she said honest things, directly, before she could decide it was a mistake. "I want you to know that. I'm not going to keep not saying it because it makes the situation more complicated." Something happened in his face. Something opened and then tightened in the way of someone who was overwhelmed by something they'd wanted and were terrified of at the same time. "Emma," he said, "you don't have to say it back. I'm not keeping score." She held his eyes. "I'm just telling you so you know what's actually at stake. For me. From where I'm standing." She stood up. She went back to her desk. Her hands were shaking slightly. She put them flat on the desk surface until they stopped. He didn't come out of his office for the rest of the afternoon. At 6:15, he appeared in her doorway. She looked up. "I love you too," he said. He said it plainly, without decoration, the way he said things that cost him. "I have for a while. I didn't know how to say it without making everything more complicated." She looked at him. "It's more complicated now," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "Okay." "Okay," he said. She went home. She sat with it, both the saying of it and the fact that the saying of it hadn't solved anything, which she'd known going in but had hoped, in the irrational way people hoped, might not be entirely true. It was June when the photograph appeared. She didn't see it first. Priya texted her at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, before Emma had gotten to the building, before her first coffee, when she was standing on the subway platform in a coat that wasn't quite warm enough for the early morning. "Are you awake?" Priya wrote. On the subway, Emma wrote back. "Have you seen the Morning Chronicle Society page?" Emma had a bad feeling immediately. She opened the browser on her phone. The subway platform was loud, and she couldn't quite process what she was looking at first. The image was small on her screen, and she had to enlarge it. Adrian Kingsley at a charity fundraiser the previous Saturday. Black tie, the kind of event Emma knew about in advance because she'd managed the RSVP process. She hadn't been there. It was a Vane Foundation event, Harrison Vane's charitable organization, and it was, as far as Emma knew, a legitimate business obligation. In the photograph, Adrian was standing with Celeste Vane, close, the way people stood in photographs. Celeste's hand was on his arm. They were both smiling at something off camera. The caption read, "Adrian Kingsley and Celeste Vane at the Vane Foundation Annual Gala. A pairing the social circuit has been watching with interest." Emma stared at the photograph. The subway came. She got on. She stood holding the rail with her phone in her other hand, and she looked at the photograph, and she felt something happen in her chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite hurt, and was maybe the particular feeling of seeing something clearly that you'd been trying not to see clearly for a long time. She went to the office. She sat at her desk. She did not go into Adrian's office. He came to her desk at 9:15, which meant he'd seen it. "Emma, I need to finish the Morrison follow-up by 10, she said. She didn't look up from her screen. "Emma, look at me." She looked up. His face was careful in the specific way of someone trying to manage a situation rather than just being in it, and she recognized the look, and it made something in her chest tighten further. "It was a photograph," he said. "It doesn't mean anything." "I know what the photograph means." "Then you know it's nothing." "It was a fundraiser. Celeste was there because her father organized the event. I was there because Harrison Vane holds 12% of this company." "I know why you were there," Emma said. She kept her voice even. She was working very hard at even. "I approved the RSVP." "Then, the problem isn't the photograph, Adrian." She set her pen down. "The problem is that Celeste Vane gets to stand next to you at a public event and have her name linked to yours in the press. And I have never once, not once, been somewhere with you that wasn't professional. Not a dinner, not an event, not a walk around the block." She paused. "I've met your daughter. I haven't met a single other person in your life who knows what I am to you." He was quiet. "The problem is," she continued, "that you told me you loved me, and I believe you. But love that exists only behind closed doors isn't love that's willing to cost you anything, And I think, she stopped, steadied herself. I think I deserve something that's willing to cost something. The office was very quiet. I need time, he said. She heard those words, and she recognized them, and she felt something in her rearrange itself, quietly, without drama, the way a bone shifted when the weight on it changed. You've said that before, she said. I know, and things are the same. He didn't deny it. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. I'm not walking out, but I need you to understand that time isn't unlimited, not because I'm giving you a deadline. I'm not. But because I'm a person, and I have limits, and pretending I don't isn't fair to either of us. She turned back to her screen. He stood there for a moment, and she could feel him standing there, and then he went back to his office. She breathed. She thought about Lucas, who had lunch with her every Friday at the Italian place, and talked to her like she was exactly who she was, no more, no less. Who had figured out, around the third Friday, that she took her coffee black at lunch but with sugar in the mornings, and who brought her a coffee from the good place 2 blocks over on a Tuesday just because he was passing it. Who talked about his work and his life with the same candor he brought to everything, including the time he mentioned, without any particular maneuvering, that he'd been in a relationship for 4 years in London that had ended when he came back to New York, and that he'd decided the coming back was still the right call, even though the ending had been hard. Do you regret it? Emma had asked. Coming back? No, he'd said. London was where I was. This feels more like where I'm supposed to be. He'd looked at her briefly, then back at his coffee. Things happen for reasons that only make sense in retrospect. She hadn't said anything to that. She thought about it now. The summer moved with the particular indifference of time that was both too fast and too slow. Emma and Adrian existed in the in-between place she'd been trying to name since spring, still present with each other, still real, but with something strained in it now, a hairline fracture that neither of them addressed directly and that widened imperceptibly with each week that nothing changed. He was kind to her. He was still the man she knew in the office, attentive, honest in his work, the person she'd come to trust with 8 months of accumulated evidence. He still texted her on weekends about Sophie's drawings and the books he was reading and the things that happened in his day that he'd decided she'd want to know about. He still said, I love you, quietly. In the moments when they were alone and the city was dark outside and it felt safe enough. But Celeste Vane appeared in the Chronicle again in July, a fundraiser in the Hamptons, and then in August, at a gallery opening. And each time Emma read about it not from Adrian but from the newspaper or from Priya, which meant Adrian knew and chose not to tell her, and that particular species of omission was its own kind of answer. Lucas noticed. She knew he noticed because he was Lucas, and Lucas paid attention to things. He didn't say anything directly for a long time. He was careful with her in the way of someone who understood that an observation made too early could close a door permanently. It was August, hot, humid, the city in the irritable haze of late summer, when he finally said something. They were at the Italian place, the regular table, the bread already ordered. Emma had been quieter than usual for most of lunch, and she knew he'd noticed, and she'd been waiting for whatever came next. You okay? He asked. I'm fine. I'm going to respectfully push back on that. She looked at him. There was something in his expression that was entirely uncalculated. Just concern, straight up, without an agenda attached to it. It's been a complicated couple of months, she said. I know. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what some of it involves. I have eyes, and I know Adrian, and I know you've been carrying something since at least June. Lucas, I'm not asking you to tell me anything. He leaned forward slightly. I'm asking if you're okay. As a friend. Full stop. She looked at him. He meant it. She could read that plainly on his face, the way she'd learned to read him over 4 months of Fridays, and the kind of conversation that builds something real, whether you intend it to or not. I'm not okay, she said. It was the first time she'd said it that directly. I've been trying to be okay, but no. He nodded. He didn't immediately say anything. He let the words exist without rushing to fix them. For what it's worth, he said carefully, you deserve better than what you've been getting. You don't know. I know enough, he said. I've watched you for 4 months. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to make themselves small enough to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. And you're too, He stopped, and something in his expression became deliberate, like he was choosing the words carefully. You're too real for that. Too actual. You don't fit small. Emma looked at him across the table. The restaurant was doing its lunchtime thing around them. Other tables, other conversations, the sound of ordinary life moving forward. That's a very generous thing to say, she said. It's just true. He met her eyes. I'm not saying this because I have an agenda. I want to be clear about that. I'm saying it because I think you've been told subtly and consistently that what you want is too much, and I don't think it is. She was quiet for a moment. He loves me, she said. I believe that. I believe it too. He said it without hesitation, which surprised her. Adrian loves the people he loves deeply. He also has walls that were built over 32 years, and they don't come down easily or quickly. He paused. The question isn't whether he loves you. The question is whether love alone is enough, without the rest of it. She had no answer to that. She went back to the office. She sat at her desk. She could hear Adrian through the half-open door. A call, talking through a contract issue with someone in legal, the familiar cadence of his working voice. She'd spent a year learning that voice. A year learning all of him. She thought about what Lucas had said. Too real. Too actual. She thought about every moment Adrian had made her feel exactly that. Real, actual, seen in the specific way she'd never quite been seen before. She thought about the Chronicle, about Celeste's hand on his arm, about a fundraiser Emma found out about from a newspaper. She thought about a hotel suite in Atlanta, and a 6-year-old in a drawing, and late-night conversations that had felt like oxygen, the kind you didn't know you'd been missing until you finally got some. She thought about what love was supposed to cost. She was still thinking about it 2 weeks later on a Thursday evening when Adrian called her into his office at the end of the day with the expression she recognized as meaning he'd made a decision about something. I want to tell you something, he said. She sat. She waited. I've been thinking about what you said. In March, and again in June. He stood at the window in the way he did when things were difficult. You were right, both times. He stopped. I've been afraid of the exposure, of what it means if it becomes public and then doesn't work, of what my father will say, what the board will interpret, what the press will write. He turned from the window. And I've been using those fears as reasons instead of naming them as fears. Emma held very still. I want to change that, he said. I want to try, properly, the way you deserve. She looked at him, and she felt it, the pull of it, the genuine hope in his voice, the way he was standing there with his composure at its most unguarded, which was the version of him she had fallen in love with. She felt all of that. She also felt, underneath it, the weight of everything that had already happened. The months of being kept private, the photograph in the Chronicle that she'd found out about from a newspaper, the word this standing in for the word he actually meant, the accumulated cost of it, paid in small increments over a year that had added up to something she couldn't ignore anymore. Adrian, she said carefully, I believe you. I believe you mean that right now. Then, I need to tell you something, she said, and I need you to let me finish. He went quiet. Over this past year, I've watched you be remarkable. I mean that. You're not what I thought you were when I wrote that message. You're not the myth, and you're not the armor. The real version of you is She stopped briefly. Someone I love. I do. That's not changing tonight. He was watching her very carefully. But I've also spent a year being someone's private truth, she said, and it's cost me something I can't fully quantify, but I can feel. And in the middle of that, someone else has been treating me like I was worth being around consistently, without conditions, without asking me to be smaller or more patient or more understanding of circumstances that, she paused, that never quite improved. His jaw tightened slightly. Lucas. Yes. She didn't look away. Not in the way you might be thinking, but yes. The room was very quiet. He makes you feel like what you're asking for is reasonable, Adrian said. It wasn't quite a question. His voice was level, but she could hear what was underneath it. He makes me feel like I'm a person who exists when he's not looking, she said. I didn't realize how much I'd been missing that until I had it from someone without having to explain why I needed it. Adrian looked at her. He looked like a man watching something happen that he understood he'd caused and couldn't undo, and he was holding himself very still with the particular discipline of someone trying not to break apart in front of another person. What are you saying? He asked. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I'm not making a decision tonight. I'm not walking out. But I'm telling you the truth because you deserve the truth, and because I've always believed that honesty was the most respectful thing one person could give another. She stood, even when it's hard. He didn't say anything as she picked up her bag. At the door she stopped. She turned back. You're not the suit, she said. You were never the suit. I was wrong about that from the beginning. She paused. But I think you might still believe you are sometimes, and until you stop believing it, you're going to keep building walls and calling it protection. She left. The elevator was empty going down. She stood in the mirrored box and looked at her own face and thought that she looked older than she had a year ago, which wasn't entirely a bad thing, but was a thing. On the lobby level, Lucas was at the security desk, picking up a visitor badge for someone from the London office who was arriving tomorrow. He saw her. He read her face in the way he read everything, directly, without drama. He didn't say anything. He just fell into step beside her as she walked toward the exit, and they went through the revolving doors into the summer evening together, and the city was doing what it always did. Indifferent, enormous, moving forward regardless. You hungry? He said. She thought about it. She was, actually. She hadn't eaten since noon. Yes, she said. Good place on 44th, nothing fancy. Okay. They walked. The evening was warm and loud with the ordinary noise of the city at rush hour. Neither of them spoke for a block, and then Lucas said, Whenever you want to talk, I'm here. Or not. We can also just eat. Emma looked at the street ahead. Let's just eat, she said. For now. Okay, he said. They walked in the warm evening air, and Emma carried everything she was carrying, and it was heavy, but it was hers. And she was not in the habit of setting down the things that were hers before she understood what she was going to do with them. She was figuring it out. That was the best she could say right now, and right now, it was enough. She gave her notice on a Monday in September. She'd thought about it over the entire weekend. Not frantically, not in the spiral way she'd processed things in harder years, but in the quiet, deliberate way she'd learned to think when the stakes were real. She sat at her kitchen table Saturday morning with coffee and a legal pad and wrote down the things she knew, because writing had always been how she sorted the things she knew from the things she only felt. What she knew, she loved Adrian. That hadn't changed, and she wasn't going to pretend it had. What she also knew, she had spent 14 months making herself available to a love that kept its doors locked from the outside. And she was tired in a way that wasn't about work hours or difficult projects, but about the sustained effort of accepting less than she'd asked for and finding reasons why that was okay. She knew that Lucas had shown her something she hadn't expected to need shown. Not a romance, not yet, but a mirror. A reflection of what it looked like when someone treated her presence as a given rather than a variable. She knew she couldn't do her job anymore. That was the practical truth underneath everything else. She couldn't sit at that desk on the 31st floor and be professional about a situation that had stopped being professional 14 months ago, and she couldn't keep pretending the lines were clean when they hadn't been clean for most of a year. She wrote, I need to leave the job. That part is clear. She wrote, the rest is less clear. Give it time. She went in Monday morning with the letter already written. Helen was at her desk. Adrian was in his office. The building was doing its ordinary thing. The mechanical exhale of the elevator, the particular light of a Manhattan September morning, the sound of a company in motion. She knocked on Helen's door first. Helen read the letter. She looked up. She had the expression of someone who wasn't entirely surprised but was genuinely sorry about it. Are you sure? Helen said. Yes. He's going to want to talk to you about it. I know, that's fine. Emma kept her voice steady. I'd like to give 4 weeks. I want to transition everything properly. I'm not leaving anyone in a difficult position. Helen looked at her for a moment with something that was more than professional regard. You've been very good at this job, she said. Better than most people I've seen in it. Thank you, Helen. Take care of yourself. Emma nodded. She went to her desk. She sat down. She opened her email and started drafting the transition documentation, because that was what you did. You kept going until you were done. You didn't leave things half-finished. You made sure the next person had what they needed. At 10:15, Adrian came to her doorway. She looked up. His face was controlled in the way it was when he was managing something that cost him. Helen had clearly told him. Come in, she said. He came in. He didn't sit. He stood near her desk, and she could see the effort it was taking him to not immediately start problem-solving, which was his first reflex for everything. You don't have to do this, he said. I do, she said. Not as a statement about anything, just practically. I can't do this job properly anymore. That's not fair to you or to the company, and it's definitely not fair to me. Emma, I'm not doing it dramatically, she said. I'm not punishing anyone. I genuinely think it's the right thing. She held his eyes. You need an assistant who can think about your calendar without thinking about everything else. I can't be that person anymore. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him working through the things he wanted to say. She'd gotten good enough at reading him to see the outline of the conversation he was choosing not to have right now. Where will you go? He asked. It was a practical question with a lot of weight underneath it. I have some things in mind. She had more than some things. She'd spent the last 6 weeks quietly and with full awareness of what it meant that she was doing it, putting together the framework for what she actually wanted to do. Financial consulting, independent, her own. Priya had connected her with 2 former Kingsley clients who'd asked about her specifically after the Morrison integration. She had enough of a foundation to begin. I'll be okay. I know you will, he said quietly. That's not what He stopped. He put his hands in his pockets. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. I always answer honestly. I know. He looked at her. Is it Lucas? She held the question for a moment. She thought about how to say what was true without making it into something it wasn't. It's not Lucas the way you mean it, she said carefully. It's not. Nothing has happened, but she paused. Being around him has shown me what it feels like to be with someone who doesn't make me negotiate for basic things. And once you see that, it's hard to go back to not seeing it. Adrian absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, watched the way it landed in his face. Not anger, not accusation, something quieter and harder than either of those. I did that, he said. Yes. I made you negotiate. Yes. She said it without cruelty, just fact. Not intentionally. I don't think you wanted to, but intentions and outcomes aren't always the same thing, and the outcome was that I spent a year feeling like what I needed was unreasonable. She paused. It wasn't unreasonable. No, he said. It wasn't. The office was very still. I'm sorry, he said. He said it in the way he said things that mattered, without performance, without the careful management of how it would land. Just the words, plain. I'm genuinely sorry, Emma, not because I'm losing you, though I am, and that's... He stopped briefly. That's its own thing, but because you deserved better, and I knew it, and I let my own fear cost you something. She felt the truth of it land. She let it land. Thank you for saying that, she said. It's late. It is, but it still matters. She looked at him, at the man she had spent a year learning, all his complexity, the parts that were extraordinary, and the parts that were still under construction. You're going to be okay too, for what it's worth. I don't know that. I do. She said it with conviction because she believed it. You're a better man than you were when I walked into this office. I've watched it happen. You're going to keep getting better, and Sophie is going to grow up with a father who figured it out, and that's not nothing. That's actually everything. He looked at her. His composure was intact, and also she could see very close to not being intact. 4 weeks, he said finally. 4 weeks, she confirmed. He went back to his office. She heard him close the door. Not hard, just closed. She turned back to her screen. She breathed. She got back to work. The 4 weeks were professional and a little painful, and in some ways, the most honest they'd ever been in the same room together, because the pretense was gone. The unnamed thing had been named, and what was left was two people who respected each other trying to close something out with integrity. Adrian did not try to change her mind after that Monday. That told her something about him, something that made her think she'd been right, that he was better than he'd been, that the version of him that Sophie was going to grow up with was going to be worth having. On her last day, Helen brought pastries to the 31st floor and assembled the small team that worked up there, 3 people, including herself, which was the full extent of Adrian's immediate orbit. They ate at the small table near the window and talked about normal things. Helen told a story about her first week at the company 12 years ago that involved a misdirected fax and a very confused senator's office. Emma laughed until her eyes watered. Adrian came in partway through. He ate a pastry standing up. He listened to Helen's story, and the corner of his mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile and was something better. At the end of the day, when everyone else had gone and it was just Emma packing the last of her desk things into a tote bag, he appeared in the doorway. "The drawing's still going to be there," he said. She knew he meant Sophie's drawing, the one in the frame on his coffee table. The 3 figures, the crayon sun, me and Daddy, in uneven letters. She made a new one this week, 2 figures again. He paused. She didn't include the dog this time. Emma felt that in a specific place. "Give her my love," she said. "I will." He stayed in the doorway. He was going to let her leave. She could see the decision in how he was standing, present but not blocking, there but not holding on. "Take care of yourself, Carter." The name. Her last name. The one he'd used at the very beginning, before everything, landed like a specific kind of tenderness. "You too," she said. She picked up her bag. She walked out. She didn't look back, because she knew if she looked back it would cost her something she needed to keep, and she'd already paid enough in that particular currency. She took the elevator down for the last time. The lobby exhaled its familiar sigh. She walked out into the September afternoon, into the particular clarity of fall air that felt like the world rinsing itself off, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. Then she walked. Emma Carter. Financial consulting opened its doors, metaphorically, because its doors were initially the second bedroom of her apartment converted into an office, in October. She had 2 clients already, both from the Kingsley adjacency, both people who had watched her work and decided they'd rather hire the person who'd actually done it. By November, she had 4. By December, she had 7 and was turning people away, and had started looking at actual office space in Midtown. It was terrifying in the way that real things were terrifying. Not the performed terror of someone who wanted sympathy, but the actual terror of a person who had bet on themselves with real money and real consequences and was watching, day by day, whether the bet was going to pay. It was paying. That was the thing she had to keep reminding herself. On the days when it didn't feel like it was paying. She was good at this, and she'd always been good at it, and the only difference now was that the work was hers and the credit was hers, and when something went wrong, she had to fix it herself. And when something went right, she got to feel it fully, without anyone else standing between her and the result. Priya called her at least twice a week. Emma called her mother more than she had in years. Something about leaving the job had loosened a knot in her she hadn't known was tied. The knot of all the energy she'd been spending on maintaining a situation that was complicated, on parsing the signals of a man she loved, in a love that wasn't quite allowing itself to be fully alive. She did not think about Adrian constantly. She thought about him sometimes. A particular memory would surface, something specific and real, and she'd let herself feel it and then let it pass. She thought about Sophie more than she expected to. She hoped the girl was okay, hoped whoever came into her father's life next was worthy of those crayon drawings and that grave, enormous-eyed attentiveness. She saw Lucas in October. It was still careful then. They both knew what it was, and neither of them was rushing anything, partly out of decency toward Adrian, and partly because rushing had never been either of their temperaments. They had dinner at a restaurant that was a small step up from the Italian lunch place. Actual dinner, not working lunch, a distinction that meant something without either of them making a speech about it. He brought her a book he'd been telling her about for 2 weeks, a history of financial crises that was more interesting than it sounded. She'd brought him a bottle of wine from a vineyard she'd visited with her mother in her mid-20s, a small New York label that nobody outside the region knew about, and that she'd been meaning to share with someone for years. He looked at the label. "I've never heard of this." "Nobody has. That's the point." He opened it at the table. He poured 2 glasses. He tasted it and said, "That's genuinely good." "I know." "How did you find it?" "Road trip, my mother, the summer I was 26. We drove through the Finger Lakes because she'd always wanted to, and neither of us had any particularly good reason not to." She turned her glass. "It was a good summer, actually, one of the last ones before things got complicated." He looked at her with his characteristic directness. "What made it complicated?" "The job that folded, the months after." She paused. "The years of trying to get back to feeling like I knew what I was doing." "But you did get back." "Eventually." She looked at the wine in her glass. "I'm not sure back is the right word, more like I got to somewhere different, somewhere I wouldn't have reached if the complicated part hadn't happened." He was quiet for a moment. "I think that's mostly how it works." "Mostly," she agreed. The dinner lasted 3 hours. Neither of them noticed until the restaurant started clearing tables around them, which was the universal signal that they'd overstayed their welcome in the pleasantest possible way. Outside, the October air was sharp and clean. They stood on the sidewalk, and she thought, this is uncomplicated. Not in the sense that there was no history, no weight, no awareness of what they were stepping into, but uncomplicated in the essential sense. She didn't have to translate anything, didn't have to read between lines or wait for signals. He was exactly what she saw, which was a thing she'd undervalued when she hadn't known how rare it was. "I'd like to do this again," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that too." He smiled, easy, unguarded, the expression of a man who didn't feel the need to protect himself from wanting things. "Good," he said. "Next week?" "Next week," she agreed. She walked home through the October evening. She called her mother from the street, which she did sometimes when she had something she wanted to share and wasn't ready to examine it too closely yet. "How was your day?" her mother asked. "Good," Emma said. "Really good, actually." Her mother heard something in her voice, the particular parental hearing that picked up frequencies beyond the words. "Emma Lynn Carter," she said. "What happened?" Emma laughed. "Nothing happened. She paused. "I think I'm going to be okay, Mom. I think things are going to be okay." A beat of silence. "They were always going to be okay," her mother said. "You just needed to get there." "You never told me that." "I told you every other week for 4 years. You weren't listening." Emma laughed again. The street was doing its October thing, leaves on the ground, the smell of someone's fireplace through a cracked window somewhere above. The city was enormous and indifferent, and also somehow kind in the way that cities were kind when you'd finally found your footing in them. "I'm listening now," Emma said. "I know," her mother said. "That's why I'm not worried." What followed was not a fairy tale. Emma knew the difference, and she'd learned, slowly and with evidence, to be suspicious of the fairy tale version of things, where the complications disappeared and the people became simple, and the love was easy because it was right. Love was not easy because it was right. Love was still work, still the sustained effort of 2 people choosing the same thing repeatedly. The difference was what you were working toward and whether the work felt like loss or growth. With Lucas, the work felt like growth. That was the essential thing. He was not perfect. She'd have been suspicious of perfect. He was impatient sometimes, the way competent people got impatient when things moved slower than they should. He had opinions he held too firmly until he got more information. He called his mother every Sunday for an hour and then spent 20 minutes processing whatever she'd said, which Emma found alternately endearing and mildly exhausting. He was particular about coffee in a way that she respected intellectually and found slightly ridiculous in practice. And she was not perfect either. She overworked, always had, slipped into the old pattern of measuring her security by her output. She was slow to ask for help, a holdover from the years when asking had meant admitting she didn't have enough, and she was still learning to outrun that instinct. She was sometimes so committed to honesty that she said things bluntly when gentleness would have served better. They were imperfect people learning the shape of each other. That was what it actually was. And it was better than the fairy tale, because it was real, and real things, she'd spent a year learning this, could hold weight. Adrian called her in November. She hadn't been expecting it, but she wasn't surprised. She sat at her desk in the second bedroom that was now an actual office with proper light and answered the phone. "Emma?" He sounded like himself, composed, direct, no preamble. "I wanted to tell you that the company is entering a partnership with one of your new clients, Hargrove Financial. I found out this morning." "I know," she said. "Michael Hargrove mentioned it last week." A pause. "Small world." "Very." He paused. "You're doing well. I heard about the Mercer Group bringing you on." "Word travels." "It does in this industry." Another pause. "I'm glad. I mean that." "I know you do." A silence, not uncomfortable. The particular silence of two people who had been important to each other and were navigating what that meant now. "Sophie asked about you," he said. Emma held that for a moment. "How is she?" "She started a new school this year. She's made a friend, a girl named Judith, who apparently has very good opinions about dogs." Something warmer came into his voice. The frequency she'd learned, the one that existed only for Sophie. "She's good. She's really good." "I'm glad," Emma said. She meant it completely. "I'm really glad, Adrian." "She drew a new picture last week." He paused. "Two figures, me and her. She drew a son and a dog, and what might be a house." He stopped. "The dog was there." Emma smiled. "She's making long-term plans." "She always was." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm working on it. The things you said. I've been talking to someone, a therapist, which I should have done years ago and didn't because I thought—" He stopped. "I thought a lot of things that were wrong." "How is it?" "Uncomfortable," he said. "Useful. That's how it's supposed to be." Apparently. She could hear the slight wryness in his voice. "I wanted you to know, not for any reason other than, you said it mattered, the trying." "It does," she said. "It matters a lot." "Okay." He seemed steadied by that. She could hear it. "Good luck with the Mercer Group. You'll run circles around their existing analysts." "I know," she said. "I know you know." And there it was. The not-quite smile, audible even through a phone call. "Take care of yourself, Carter." "You too," she said. She hung up. She sat at her desk. She thought about a year ago, standing in that office for the first time, the expensive suit metaphor, the framed drawing on the coffee table, all of it. She thought about how wrong she'd been about him and how right she'd been about him simultaneously, and how both of those things were true at the same time, and how that was just people. People were both things at once, the best version and the limited version, the love they offered and the fear that shaped how they offered it. You couldn't have one without the other because people weren't separable into components. They were whole things, imperfect and specific, and the question was never whether someone was perfect. The question was whether who they were, exactly as they were, was something you could build a life beside. She had learned that from the long way around. Most important things she'd noticed came from the long way around. By spring, her consulting business had moved into actual office space. A small suite in Midtown, 2 rooms, a conference table that seated 6, a coffee maker that she had strong opinions about. She'd hired one analyst, a young woman named Danny, who reminded her uncomfortably of herself 7 years ago, sharp and underpaid, and slightly too careful about taking up space. "You don't have to ask before you share an opinion," Emma told her in the first month. Danny looked at her. "I was told in my last job that juniors should observe first." "I was told that too," Emma said. "The people who told me took credit for my work for 2 years. So I'll tell you what I actually believe. If you see something I'm missing, tell me. I'll tell you if you're wrong, and I'll tell you why. That's the deal." Danny thought about that. "Okay," she said. Good. Emma handed her the Mercer projections. Tell me what you see in the Q3 assumptions. She saw something. She was right. Emma told her she was right, and they fixed it together, and it was as simple and as significant as that. It was late April when Lucas told her he'd turned down a job offer that would have taken him back to London. They were at her apartment, dinner at the kitchen table, takeout from the Thai place 3 blocks over that they'd established as the default option for weeknight evenings when neither of them had the energy to cook, but both of them wanted to be somewhere comfortable. He said it the way he said things, directly, without preamble, setting it on the table the way you set down something you'd decided about, and didn't need to deliberate further. You didn't tell me about the offer, she said. It came in last week. I thought about it for 2 days and then called them back. He pulled apart his chopsticks. It wasn't actually a difficult decision. I just needed to make sure it wasn't. Emma looked at him. Lucas. I know, he said. He met her eyes. I'm not saying it to pressure you. I'm saying it because I think you should know what I'm choosing. He paused. I'm here. I want to be here. That's what I'm choosing. She held that. The weight of someone choosing, clearly and without condition. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, she said again, and she meant it in the way that sometimes a single word held everything you needed to say. He passed her the spring rolls. She took one. Outside the window, the city was doing its spring thing. The particular quality of evening light in late April, when the air finally stopped being cold and the street trees were doing their annual impossible trick of going from bare to green in what felt like an afternoon. She thought about something she'd read once. The idea that you didn't fall into real love. You built it. You built it out of ordinary material, shared tables and different coffee opinions, and the way someone handled it when you were wrong, and the particular way they listened, and the choosing. The daily, unremarkable choosing that didn't feel like anything grand but added up, over time, to something that could hold weight. She thought about what she'd learned from the year before, about the difference between a love that was real in private and a love that was willing to be real in public. About the cost of being someone's secret and the particular loneliness of it, which wasn't dramatic or acute, but was chronic and wearing in the way that things you accepted as normal became normal, until you stepped outside them and looked back and understood what they'd been doing to you all along. She thought about what it meant to be chosen, not in the grand gesture sense, not the flowers and the pronouncements and the public declarations, though those things could be part of it, but chosen in the daily sense, chosen when it was inconvenient, chosen when other options existed, chosen openly, in front of other people, without the choosing being a negotiation or a liability. She had been chosen like that now. She was still getting used to it. It was June when Lucas asked her to come to Greece. He had a reason. A friend with a villa on Santorini who was lending it for 2 weeks, and Lucas had been holding the offer since February, waiting for the right time. He asked her over dinner at a restaurant that was a significant step up from takeout, which she noted without making it into more than it was, because she'd learned that the best things didn't need to be made into more than they were. Greece, she said. Santorini specifically. June. 2 weeks. He looked at her with the directness that was simply who he was. Say no if you want to say no, but I want to ask properly. She looked at him across the table. She thought about her mother and the Finger Lakes and the wine she'd been saving to share with someone. She thought about the second-bedroom office and Danny and the Mercer Group and the life she'd been building, one solid piece at a time, on a foundation that was finally, actually, genuinely, hers. She thought about what peace felt like. She hadn't known for a long time because she'd been so busy surviving that she'd never slowed down enough to notice the difference between surviving and actually living. She knew now. Peace felt like this. Like a kitchen table with spring rolls and someone who had turned down London without any drama about it. Like an office with a coffee maker she cared about, and a young woman she was trying to teach the things nobody had taught her. Like a phone call with her mother that ended with, "I'm not worried." "Yes," she said. He smiled. Not the polished version, the real one, the one that changed his whole face. "Yeah?" "Yes," she said again. "Let's go to Greece." The islands were everything people said they were, and also nothing like the photographs, because photographs couldn't hold the specific quality of the light, in the late afternoon when it came off the water at a certain angle and made the white buildings look like they'd absorbed every hour of sunshine they'd ever seen and were slowly releasing it back into the air. They couldn't hold the sound of the sea at night, which was different from any other sound Emma had encountered. Patient and enormous and entirely unconcerned with human timelines. They spent the days without a schedule, which Emma had to consciously allow herself to do. She was a person who scheduled. It was professional training and also personality, the legacy of years when an unscheduled day had meant a day without income. She let Lucas pry the schedule out of her hands, gently and with good humor, and replace it with the radical suggestion that they decide what to do based on what they felt like doing. It turned out she felt like swimming in the morning and eating lunch at tables overlooking the water and walking through towns where the streets were barely wide enough for two people and reading in the afternoon and being somewhere with the particular quality of quiet that came from being far away from everything that usually required her attention. She felt like this, she realized. She felt like being here, with him, without an agenda. That was new. It was good. On the sixth day, they were sitting on the terrace of the villa in the early evening, the sky doing its famous Santorini thing, the sun dropping toward the caldera, turning the light from gold to something deeper, the sea going colors that didn't have exact names in English. She'd brought wine. He'd brought the bread from the bakery in the village below that they'd been walking to every morning because it was the best bread she'd ever eaten, and she intended to be sincere about this until she got home and found it next to impossible to stop thinking about. They weren't talking. The comfortable silence, the one she'd first noticed with Adrian and then recognized again with Lucas, though it felt different with Lucas, less careful, more settled. The silence of people who didn't need to fill the air. She heard him shift in his chair. She looked over. He was looking at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." "You're doing something," she said. She could tell. There was a quality to his stillness that was different from regular stillness. He sat forward in his chair. He put his wine glass down on the table beside him. He reached into the pocket of the light jacket he'd put on when the evening cooled and he pulled out something small. She looked at the small thing. She looked at him. "I've been carrying this for 2 weeks," he said. "I bought it in the city before we left because I thought—" He stopped, and for the first time in as long as she'd known him, he looked slightly undone. Not the composed Lucas, not the confident Lucas, but a man who was holding something he cared about and was not entirely sure what would happen next. "I thought if the moment showed up, I wanted to be ready for it." He opened his hand. A ring. Simple, specific, beautiful in the way things were beautiful when they'd been chosen with actual attention. "I'm not going to give a speech," he said. "You know I don't do speeches." He met her eyes. "I just know that the past 8 months have been the best version of a life I've had. And I don't think that's an accident. I think it's you." He paused. "I think you're the reason." She felt it in her chest, not the complicated tangle that love had been for the past year, but something cleaner and heavier at the same time, like weight that was welcome. "Emma Carter," he said. "Will you marry me?" The sun was going down over the caldera. The sea was going all its impossible colors. The bread from the village was still on the table. She thought about a message accidentally sent to 4,000 people, and a man who had responded by pulling her closer when he should have let her go. She thought about Atlanta and late-night conversations and all the ways people showed you who they were when you paid attention. She thought about the things she'd learned from loving someone who was afraid, about the cost of it, and also about what it had taught her, which was not nothing. It had taught her what she actually needed. It had given her the language for what she wanted. She thought about standing on that sidewalk outside the Kingsley building with her bag on her shoulder, choosing to walk away from a love that couldn't quite choose her back. She thought about this man across from her who had turned down London, who paid attention, who had asked her about her day and meant it, who had given her space to figure things out and been there on the other side of the figuring. She was 31 years old. She had built something from nothing more than once. She had learned the difference between surviving and living. She had stopped being afraid, mostly, of taking up space. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady. It came out steady and whole and certain. "Yes." His face, She'd remember this, she knew, the particular expression on his face in the moment she said yes. Not triumph, not relief, just a person who had asked for the thing he wanted most and been answered, and the answering was enough. He put the ring on her finger. His hands were steady. She was crying. She realized she was crying only when she tasted it, the salt of it, and she didn't wipe it away because there was no performance happening here, and tears didn't need to be managed. He stood up. She stood up. He put his arms around her and she put her face against his shoulder, and the Aegean sun kept going down in its extravagant way, and the sea kept doing its patient, enormous thing below them. She thought about her mother, who would answer the phone in Ohio and hear the whole story and say, she knew exactly what she'd say. I'm not surprised. I was never worried. She thought about Priya, who would need at least 40 minutes on the phone to process this properly and would probably cry and then immediately ask about the venue. She thought about Sophie, 7 years old now, who had drawn 3 figures in crayon and then taken one away and then added a dog, and who was figuring out, in her own 7-year-old way, what family meant and what it was made of. She thought about Adrian, who was talking to a therapist and becoming a better version of himself, and raising a daughter who would grow up knowing her father had figured it out, eventually, which was late, but was still something worth having. She held that thought gently. She hoped he got there. She believed he would. And then she let it go. The way you let go of the things you'd carried for a long time when you finally understood you didn't need to carry them anymore. Not because they didn't matter, but because your hands were full of something else now, something alive and present and entirely worth holding. The terrace, the wine, the bread from the village, the ring on her finger, the man who had chosen her openly, in public and private, consistently and without conditions. The sun finished going down. The sky went dark and filled up with stars, the specific extravagance of stars over the Aegean, which had been doing this since long before anyone was watching and would keep doing it long after. Emma Carter, soon to be Emma Kingsley, a name that still made her want to laugh at the particular strangeness of a life's trajectory, stood on a terrace in Greece with her face tipped up to the sky and thought about how none of this was the story she would have written for herself 5 years ago. 5 years ago, she was sitting in an apartment with $3,000 in her account, trying to figure out which mistakes had led her there and whether any of them were reversible. She hadn't been able to see this far. That was the honest truth. She had not known it was coming. Not this specific thing, not this particular life. She just kept going, kept choosing the harder, honest thing over the easier, comfortable lie, kept asking for what she needed even when asking felt like too much, kept getting up after the moments that knocked her down and looking for what was still standing. And this was what was standing. This was where the keeping going had brought her. She didn't believe everything happened for a reason. She was too practical for that, had seen too much random difficulty distributed too unevenly to think there was some governing logic behind who got what and when. But she did believe that the choices you made accumulated over time in the direction of what was real and true and honest. Those choices built something. Not a perfect life. Not a clean story without loss or error or the ache of things that didn't work out, but something solid, something that could hold, something like peace. She turned back to Lucas. He was watching her with the expression she'd come to understand as his version of the near smile, the private one, the one that wasn't for anyone else. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She considered it. The real answer, not the simple one. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said, "and that I didn't know it was possible to feel that. So I'm just noticing it." He reached over and took her hand. His thumb ran across the ring, briefly, a gesture that was entirely natural and entirely new. "Good," he said. "Yeah," she said. "Good." The stars over the Aegean were doing their ancient and different work. The sea was patient below. The bread was still on the table, and the wine, and two people who had found each other in the complicated way that real things got found. Emma held on to his hand. She looked at the sky. She let herself be there, fully, in the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a life that had turned out to be larger than fear and longer than loss. That was enough. That was everything.